I mentioned science fiction authors and things talking about a world where cars drive themselves and we don't have to fight wars anymore because we can all grow as much food as we want and we have as much energy as we want, so we can live lives the way we want. And the fact that we're realistically the first generation in history who could do that, who could, who don't need to ever burn anything to get energy, who could make food without killing animals, that we can move ourselves around without having to burn anything. We're the first generation to do this is really a privilege. And I think we should harness it the best we can. Every aspect of all of the sort of fundamental sectors of the economy and of society and of life, we see the same pattern over and over again of new technologies replacing old ones, along with, essentially the same characteristics each time. And those characteristics I call the pattern of progress. A new technology is invented, it's introduced to the market, it takes over the market in a 10, 15, 20-year period in an S-shaped curve. It causes the old technology to collapse in an S-shaped curve. And if you plot the two on a graph together, you get something that looks like the letter X. I start off the book showing, some historical examples all throughout the book. It's just example after example of how this pattern repeats and has repeated, for decades, for centuries, for who knows how far back. How many of our problems that we have today, environmental problems, social problems, health problems, are all interconnected and all come back to these basic issues of food and energy, transportation, and the materials that we make and how we live our lives. And that's shaped by the technology that we have and whatever is the cheapest and easiest thing to do. If it's cheap and easy to have an online conversation, we do that. The switch has already happened. You have to worry about the sort of 2 or 3 worst weeks of the year in terms of sunshine and wind. What are the least sunny, least windy times of the year when you're reliant on batteries? Because that's, that determines the size of the battery system that you'll need. And we did the calculations, and it's, if it's the worst 2 weeks of the year that you have to get through, the other 50 weeks of the year, you just have a staggering amount of power at zero marginal cost. You're not paying for fuel or anything. What are you going to do with all of that energy? It's an incredible superabundance of power, or what we call superpower.
What about the externalities that batteries have, solar panels as well?
We know that we can recycle batteries. This is largely an energy issue. We can recycle 99+% of the material from batteries. We've killed each other, we've hurt each other with new technologies, and we've caused economic crises. There have been disruptions in the past that are like that, and we could reasonably see that again. We'll have to find some way, if that's universal basic income or something like that, but we'll have to rethink all of economics. We'll have to, because as you said, economics is based on scarcity. The basic definition of economics is allocating resources under a condition of scarcity. And if you don't have a condition of scarcity, if you're living in a world more like they live in Star Trek, where you at a push of a button you can have whatever you want, then we have to rethink how economics works. And I don't know exactly how it works on the Starship Enterprise, but we should probably study that, because we have some of their technology now. So if we have their technology, then we're going to have some of their economic thinking too. We have to rethink it in a way that we can avoid the depression, world wars, the collapsing of empires, of oil empires, without it resulting in the negative consequences that we've seen before.
And what do you think could be things that could help us to navigate this so it doesn't happen?
Well, the answer is...
Hi, and welcome back to New World in the Making. Today, I have the real pleasure and honor of speaking with Brent, an engineer and now the author of Pattern of Progress, who just became an Amazon bestseller. I'm genuinely honored to have him on the podcast. This conversation was fascinating, rich, and full of insights. I learned a lot. We explored the history of innovation, the technologies that shape our world and ourselves, including maybe the ones that we don't even often recognize as the technology. We explore the possibilities of abundant energy and something that Brad and his colleagues call superpower, what that is, and what kind of new technologies and challenges could arise in a world not defined by scarcity, but by abundance, is that we're going to cover in the episode. So let's dive in. Thanks so much, Brett, for joining. I'm super excited.
I am too. Thank you.
You just published a book and it's already on Amazon as a bestseller, right?
Yes, for a day, I think. So
Right.
Amazon updates their statistics all the time, so it seems to be pretty random. It's near the top for new releases in technology. So I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations. It's an honor to have you here. And yeah, to tell us a little bit more about you and about the book and the work that you do, the research that you've done. But before all that, maybe can you give us a little bit of a background on who are you, what brought you here, and yeah, were there any pivotal moments that you think like that has brought me here?
Sure. When people write a book, this is my first book, and I've worked on it the past few years. It's called The Pattern of Progress: How Radically Cheaper, Easier, Faster, Better Technologies and Ideas Rapidly Change the World. And when people write a book or do any sort of creative project like that, they'll often say, I've been working on this my whole life, basically. And when I finished this, I sort of understood that intellectually, but when I actually finished writing this, I was like, yes, I get it now. That I sort of have been working on this my whole life. I was born and raised in the U.S. Went to undergraduate in engineering, chemical engineering. I now live in Norway. I've lived in Norway the past 14 years, but born and raised in the U.S. I did my undergraduate in chemical engineering, and when you're a student, they force you to take some classes outside of your major. So you take your engineering classes, and I signed up for courses in what's called system dynamics. System dynamics is if you're familiar with systems thinking and system dynamics, they're related to each other. It's very common in sort of environmental sciences. It's used in economics, complex systems, really. People who study sort of multiple interacting parts that have nonlinear relationships and feedback loops, where if you build something, it gets easier to build more of that thing and that kind of stuff. So it's sort of engineering, it's computer simulation, modeling, but it's also, and kind of STEM related science, technology, engineering related mathematics. But it was also outside of my major. But I just found it really fascinating. And it was just something that sort of stuck with me. I'd read different authors who have written books about system dynamics, about systems thinking. I worked at a software company that makes system dynamics simulation software, and I went back, got my PhD, went to graduate school to get my doctorate degree, again in chemical engineering, but this was simulation related. So I was studying phase transitions, how gas molecules bounce together and hit a surface and become a liquid, or how a liquid evaporates. So I spent a lot of time, looking at a computer screen with little molecules bouncing around on it and hitting into each other. Got my PhD, got married, started working, and my wife, my ex-wife at the time, was pregnant, and she said, "I want to move back to Norway." She's from Norway. I want to move back, be close to my family. And I said, "Okay, fine. We're having a baby, and I'll move to another country and find work there." So we moved to Norway, and I found work at a Norwegian company, and we split up eventually. But so I switched from a family visa to a work visa. I was working at the company, and I sort of had to work there in order to stay in the country. And I was as a company called De Norske Veritas, DNV. And they are engineer consultants. So they work on big infrastructure projects. If you want to build a pipeline, you want to build a ship, something like that, and you've designed it, you're not allowed to approve the design on your own, right? I mean, you design the thing yourself. So somebody else has to come in and inspect it. And when it's being constructed, or after it's been constructed, and they're like annual inspections. So if you have a car, you have to take your car for its annual emissions inspection. Ships do the same basic thing. So if you're going to build a big ship, you have to have annual safety and health inspections. So they do that kind of stuff. Um, and I was working there, and this was like 2014, 2015. The oil price, August 2014, the oil price in the world fell by half. There's all sorts of stuff that happened 2014, 2015 that are still having effects today. Volkswagen got caught with their emissions scandal in 2015.
Yes.
Yeah, putting cheat software in their cars. And I mean, just in the past few weeks, a few people have been convicted and put in prison, a few former Volkswagen executives for their involvement in that scandal. In 2014, Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea. Uh, and then in 2015, there was this idea to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And there was the final investment decision on that in 2015. So Vladimir Putin annexes Crimea in 2014, and then 2015 there's the final investment decision, and Russians and Western Europeans decide to build this big pipeline, natural gas pipeline from Russia to Western Europe. And the company that I was working for, works on big infrastructure projects like this. So they were involved in this project, and I was like, are you crazy? You're going to build a natural gas pipeline from Russia to Western Europe? And it just seemed so crazy to me that I'm American and living in Europe. And when you listen to what American politicians were saying about this pipeline, it's one thing if you're buying oil from the Middle East or something. They put oil onto a ship and they can send it to Asia, they can send it to the Americas, they can send it to Europe, whatever else. But if you build a pipeline, you are physically connected. The customer, the supplier and the customer are connected. So you sort of have to buy from that supplier. Otherwise, you're wasting an enormous amount of money building that pipeline and not using it. So it's not the same as buying oil. If you're, buying natural gas through a pipeline, you're physically connected. And I was like, are you crazy? Why are you building this pipeline? And this company that I was working for was a Norwegian company, and made with a merger with a German company. So the managers, were Norwegians and some were German, and they were telling me, oh, this is such a great idea this will be the backbone of Europe's energy supply for the future. Natural gas is a lot lower CO2 emissions per unit of energy than coal. So if we import natural gas from Russia, then we can use less coal. This will be less CO2 emissions. And Germans have this expression, Wandel durch Handel. Have you ever heard of this before?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it literally means change through trade, basically. So Wandel is to change someone, to influence them. Durch, through, and Handel, literally handling of, like handling goods. So exchange, trade. So if we're, we buy and sell, you're the customer, I'm the supplier, or I'm the customer, you're the supplier. If I'm buying something from you, I have influence over you. If we're doing trade, I can influence, if Russia says they want to invade, in Georgia or whatever, they're attacking, they claim Chechnya, they claim Crimea, they claim Moldova, parts of Moldova, something like that. You can influence them because you're their customer. So they said, if we want to influence Russia's actions in the world, we have to trade with them. The more engaged we are, the more influence we have over them. And the more Russia develops economically, the more they will become like Western Europe. So right now, Putin has been in power for 20 years, 25 years. But if we want Russia to be more like, more democratic, we want them to respect human rights, not lock people up in prison for criticizing Putin, not throw people out of buildings, that sort of stuff, then we should trade with them. The more economic development in Russia, the more respect they will have for the political rights, for women's rights, for gay rights, that kind of stuff. And I was listening to all these explanations and just thinking to myself, this is the craziest, most self-serving, sort of dishonest arguments I've ever heard in my life. And just, as I said, as an American, listening to American politicians talk about this project, everyone was against it. Barack Obama was against it. There's a senator from Texas in the U.S. named Ted Cruz, who's a Republican, who's against it. Donald Trump was against it. Joe Biden, when he became president, 2021 or 2022, said he was against it. So I was like, I can't think of any other issue that Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, Republicans and Democrats all over the political spectrum just said, this is just. There's this author that I really like. His name is Robert Zubrin, and he wrote a book called The Case for Mars, where he laid out basically how you can build a colony on Mars. And he wrote this, back in the 1990s. And he called the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, he called it the Molotov-Ribbentrop pipeline. I follow him. He calls that on Twitter. I follow him on Twitter. And I thought that was a great description of it, because it's the same thing that the Germans did before World War II, where they made the German-Soviet Cooperation Agreement, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement, where they said that they will buy resources from Russia. They'll buy oil and gas and wood and metals and minerals. They will send back machinery in response. They will use cheap Polish labor, forced labor, and they will, and everything will be managed by the Germans. And then the plan for the Nord Stream pipeline was build a natural gas pipeline from Russia, have it come to Western Europe. It'll provide energy to German households, provide energy to Polish factories, where Polish people will build Volkswagen cars that have cheap devices in them to get around environmental regulations. And I was like, this is, how in the world could you do this? How could you build this thing? And it was just a sort of a mystery to me. But then in 2017, the company that I was working for signed an agreement to build a luxury mega yacht for Vladimir Putin personally. So this is the Scheherazade, which was the project started in 2017 and it went into the water in 2020. And then it's been locked up in Italy the past few years. It was built at a shipyard in Germany. It was designed in Finland, built at a shipyard in Germany. Dinorska Veritas, the DNV, this company that I worked for, also built the Dilbar. They built the Amadea, these, multi-100 million euro mega yachts. So the Scheherazade, which is Putin's personal mega yacht, is like 700 million euros. And I was like, why? I mean, okay, it's one thing to do business in Russia, like if you're Pizza Hut or whatever, Domino's Pizza, and you're serving pizza to Russians. I don't, that's okay. That's okay as far as I'm concerned. I don't have anything against Russians personally. Like I said, I'm an engineer. And if you go through an engineering program, mathematics program, you're going to meet Russians. You're going to meet Chinese and Indians and people from all over the world. I don't have anything against Russians individually. But at the same time, there's a difference between, doing business in Russia and doing business for Vladimir Putin personally. And if there's a contract somewhere in the world with Putin's name on one side saying, yes, build me a mega yacht, and your name on the other side, that's a reputational risk as far as I'm concerned. You're doing it just for the money at that point. And maybe, this is a question that children could answer correctly of, do we build a mega yacht for the bad man? Like if you had a puppet show with like the evil king wants a new boat and you can build that boat, should we build the boat for the bad man? And all the children would show, no. But if you wave enough money, there are people in this world who will say, oh yes, money. I like money. I can build a new ski chalet in the mountains of Norway or something. And the money is more important to me than whatever the consequences of that are. So I was just really upset, really depressed, end of 2017 or so, working at this company, going into work, on Sunday nights, I'd get really upset thinking that I have to go to work tomorrow. Monday, I'd go into work and just count the minutes until the lunch, basically. And I do that every day of, I can't believe that, is this what I did with my life? I got an undergraduate degree in engineering, got a graduate degree in engineering, got a job, moved to another country so that I can, build a yacht for Vladimir Putin, or build a pipeline that, when you build a pipeline and natural gas comes in one direction, money goes in the other direction. So you're just giving money to Vladimir Putin to do whatever he wants with it. And, this was 2017. I didn't know that, there'd be this wider war in Ukraine, but I did know that, Putin was fighting in Syria. He was backing Bashar al-Assad. So I didn't know what was going to happen over the next few years, but I knew nothing good can come from it. And so I was working at the company, and I wasn't involved in the Nord Stream project at all. I was never involved in the Scheherazade yacht project. I was involved in this energy forecasting group. So people who were looking, they're trying to look, out to 2050 and beyond as to what the demand will be for natural gas, what the demand will be for oil. Everything in the world is sort of interconnected. So natural gas, you can burn it and cook your dinner, but you can also use it to make fertilizer. So, right, you use nitrogen from the air and you use hydrogen from natural gas, and you make fertilizer. So food and energy are connected, and oil can be made into plastic. It can be made into, liquid fuel for cars and planes and whatever. So, how many electric cars will be sold in the coming decades tells you what, in part, what the demand will be for oil. So, if electric cars are replacing these diesel Volkswagen cheating diesel cars, then there could be a switch over from away from oil quite quickly if it follows this sort of historical patterns that we've seen in other types of new technologies being adopted. Um, and I wasn't agreeing with what the company was saying for their forecasts of the future, of just looking out, trying to predict what demand will be like in 2050, for instance, when we can't even see 5 years into the future for most things. In 2017, I didn't know that there'd be this wider fighting in Ukraine. A couple of years ago, we didn't know that. A couple of years ago, we didn't know that Hamas and Israel would be fighting. A couple of weeks ago, we didn't know that Israel and Iran would be shooting missiles at each other. But here it is. I mean, there's always the possibility, but you can't really predict what's going to happen. Um, so I would go into work. I was watching YouTube videos about, the future of energy, the future of electric cars and things. And I come across this video by Tony Seba. He had written a book, Clean Disruption of Transportation and Energy. He had these presentations, and you can find them on YouTube. So I found one where he gave a presentation in Boulder, Colorado, June 8th, 2017. And I actually, if I can find the text for it, I just copied the first minute of the text for it, because it was just such a inspiration to me, and a revelation. It was like, being outdoors on a rainy day or something, and the clouds part and the sun shines and you feel the warmth of the sun. Basically just such a different way of viewing the world from what I'd been dealing with at this company where I was working. So I'll just read the first minute very quickly. He's up on stage, and he's saying, this is the very beginning of the presentation. He says, "I want to take you into the future of energy and transportation. And when I say future, I don't mean 50 years from now. I mean 5 years from now. But before I do that, I want to take you into the past." And then he shows two photographs. He shows one from New York City, Easter Day in the year 1900. And it's nothing but horses. It says lines of horse carriages, and in there's one car. If you look really closely, it's a black and white photo. So in there's one car among all these horses. And then he shows a picture from the same basic location, same street, Fifth Avenue, New York City, Easter Parade 1913. So 13 years later, he says, 13 years later, can anyone see the horse in that picture? And it's just a line of cars, and there actually is one horse-drawn carriage. So he said, this is a technology disruption. That's how quickly things change. They go from, all horses except one to all cars except one in 13 years in this case. And that was more than 100 years ago. But that was just such a revelation to me because of just his perspective there, where there's a lot of information just in that little segment that he said of we should be looking 5 years into the future, not 50. Projections of what life will be like for energy or the environment in the year 2100 or 2050 aren't really that meaningful because technology changes so quickly. But also the idea that, if we want to see into the future, we should look into the past. So, people have seen massive technology changes, massive social changes, wars and pandemics and everything else before. And, they went through some of these these changes, these technology changes, as quickly as we have with film cameras to digital cameras, and now with electric cars and the internet and artificial intelligence. These are not, they're new things, but they're not really, because we've seen massive changes like this before in the past. Over the course of a decade or two, technologies like the horse that he said we used for thousands of years, and we just stopped using them over about a 2-decade period. So I was just so, fascinated by his perspective. I read his report, Rethinking Transportation 2020 to 2030. I read his book, Clean Disruption of Transportation and Energy. And I was just so, fascinated by it. I wrote to Rethink X. This was a brand new, not-for-profit organization that had just gotten started, and I just said, I want to work with you. I read their Rethinking Transportation report, and they talk about system dynamics in there. I said, okay, I know this from my undergraduate work. I know that you get it. I know that you understand. So they said, yes, yeah, sure, let's work together. So I left my job at the Norwegian German company. I started working with Rethink X. It's a small organization, and that's dedicated to looking at technology-related disruptions and the impacts that that technology has on society. And I started there, and in early 2018, Tony started this project. He gave me access to some of his notes from when he was writing his book and his reports about how much cars cost and how much horses cost and how quickly one replaced the other. And he looks at all sorts of different technologies. He's looked at LiDAR, and he's looked at digital cameras. And if you watch his presentations, he gives a list in some cases of things that fascinate him. And I just would I said, let's compile as many examples as I can of technology-related disruptions in history. And I just wanted to put together Tony's examples, and just the examples that Rethink X looked at, and then just things that I knew from my personal life of the internet and digital cameras and DVDs becoming streaming, and VCR cassette tapes becoming DVDs, and music cassette tapes becoming CDs, and just every example I could possibly think of. And I started putting them together. I sorted them sort of chronologically, oldest to newest, and then realized, these things are all interconnected. So Bessemer starts making steel. Steel gives us, steel bridges, and the automobile, bicycle frames become, the basic frames for the automobile. Steel undergoes this revolution in the mid 1900s with the oxygen blast furnace that makes steel even cheaper. So we start making steel shipping containers, and that's why we have cheap international shipping today. So all these things, I started not just mapping out the individual technologies, but also how they're interconnected, how one technology or a few technologies combined and unlock another technology, or one technology unlocks other possibilities. And wound up with this huge, elaborate system. I wound up looking at about 1,500 different examples of, since the book was published, of found even more. I said, let's take sort of I can't write a book about 1,500 different things. I'll just take like the top 10% of examples, map them out into one big diagram, write a little description for each one about, who invented it, where was it invented, what technologies enabled it, how quickly was it adopted by the marketplace. And when you write a little description of each and you put things in chronological order, you're basically halfway to a book. So I finished, I wrote the book, and I've published it, and that's what I've been doing. That's a very long description of how the book came about, but basically I'm an engineer who went to work for a company that was doing things that I didn't agree with. I saw Tony Seba. He opened my eyes to, the sun, a beam of light descended. And then I realized, this story of these horses in 1900 and cars in 1913 is a universal story. It's a pattern. We see the same sort of characteristics of basically every new technology replacing another technology, new ideas replacing old ideas. And I was afraid a bit that the book would be kind of boring, because I'm essentially telling the same story over and over again. whether it's for fabric dyes or carpenter's nails or cars or CDs or whatever, music or whatever else. Maybe you're not interested in the history of steel, but it's the same, or whatever, the history of cars or the history of horses or anything else. But you will recognize this pattern when once Tony explained it to me, I could then turn around and explain it another 100 times of, oh yes, we've also seen it in all these other areas of life, from food and energy and materials and transportation, information and communications and labor and healthcare and sports and entertainment, and just basically every aspect of all of the sort of fundamental sectors of the economy and of society and of life. We see the same pattern over and over again of new technologies replacing old ones, along with essentially the same characteristics each time. And those characteristics I call the pattern of progress. A new technology is invented, it's introduced to the market, it takes over the market in a 10, 15, 20-year period, in an S-shaped curve. It causes the old technology to collapse in an S-shaped curve. And if you plot the two on a graph together, you get something that looks like the letter X. And I start off the book showing, some historical examples, just a page of examples, but all throughout the book, it's just example after example of how this pattern repeats and has repeated, for decades, for centuries, for who knows how far back.
Wow. I'm speechless. Honestly, I'm speechless. I got super emotional while you were talking about the whole progress of your whole life story, basically.
Mhm.
And thanks for sharing all this. And totally not boring. I everything that I've read about the book was so fascinating, and just it's eye-opening. And I just the way that you start, even with how fire was changing everything for us. Maybe you can go a little bit into that, just because I love the start of everything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure. So Tony made this statement. He said, I've looked at every technology back to the invention of agriculture, and I keep seeing, the same basic story, the same pattern of technologies replacing each other. And it got me thinking, why are we only looking back to agriculture? Agriculture was 10,000 years ago, and our species has existed, Homo sapiens, for 200,000. So for 95% of history, we've been feeding ourselves without intentionally growing food. Um, and why just ourselves? Like, fire was a disruption, wasn't it? Stone tools and arrows and whatever else, and we didn't invent those things. We didn't invent fire. We didn't invent stone tools. Homo habilis invented stone tools. We've found thread in caves that were inhabited by Neanderthals. So Neanderthals took fiber and spun them into these 3 fiber threads that we've used, for tens of thousands of years. So these weren't our inventions. Neanderthals made, artwork. They scratched things onto walls of caves. So they made artwork. We think they made jewelry. They buried their dead. I'm not an expert on Neanderthals, but I know that people, Homo sapiens, are not the only people species that has ever existed. There have been other kinds of humans, and they've made technology too. So, is this limited to just us? Is this limited to just humans? Um, I remember reading decades ago, learning about the books about birds that live in England. That back when they used to deliver milk in bottles, in glass bottles, and a milkman would set the bottle on your front step. The bottles had these like metal foil caps, and the birds learned to peck through the cap and open it up, and drink the cream that rose to the top. And this behavior spread all throughout England in like a 20-year period. So some birds learned, hey, we can open these bottles and drink the milk, and they taught that behavior to other birds. It spread all throughout England, and we've seen things like that since then. We've seen chimpanzees teach each other how to use moss and dip moss into puddles that are difficult to access and drink from directly, but dip the moss like a sponge and use it to drink water from the puddle. And we know that whales communicate with each other. So are we like the only species that does this, or is this something that's universal? And that's why I started off the book by talking about which things are universal. If aliens came down to planet Earth, would they recognize this idea of, an X-shaped curve of one technology replacing another and say, yes, that's happened to us too? And I don't know if aliens would, but I think, as far back as you go, to inventing fire or stone tools or things like that, that has shaped us. That these are new technologies. And just simple things like cooking food changed who we are. So gorillas spend their days just they're foragers. They eat what is in visual range of themselves. So they go and they grab leaves and things and eat that. They don't have to wander around through the woods looking for food because it's all around them. But the downside is that they spend something like 6 or 7 hours a day just eating. And they need enormous intestines because they're just eating leaves that are sort of low nutritional value. So they sit around all day eating and, I don't know, rubbing their stomachs and lying around it, in the forest. Whereas us, we forage for food. We walk around looking for things that are higher nutritional value. And then for a couple of 100,000 years, we've been making fire and cooking food. And when you cook food, you're essentially moving part of digestion outside of your body. You are, instead of having to eat something and digest it entirely, you're starting the process of breaking down food. And what this is doing is it means that we eat for an hour a day, basically, or a couple of hours a day, when it used to be harder to find food historically. So it was a few hours a day, but it wasn't 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day. It wasn't most of our waking hours spent on just the act of getting food. So it really opens up, a new possibilities for us, in that we now have the ability to do other things besides just acquire food and eat. And we started walking upright, better than gorillas, better than chimpanzees. We're much more efficient at walking than they are. So just our feet, the structure of our legs, the chimpanzees' knees are basically more like our elbows. They're much more flexible, which is great if you want to, swing through the trees or something. But if you want to walk, it's basically like constantly walking on your hands. It's a lot of energy. So we just use a lot less energy to walk a given distance. It's about a third, maybe a quarter, compared to chimpanzees. And there are scientists who study this. They take people and put masks on them and put them on a treadmill, and they take chimpanzees and put masks on them and put them on a treadmill, and see how much energy it takes to walk a given distance. And we're just more efficient by about 3 or 4 times. And I'm an engineer. That means basic math here. I don't want to, if you're not a numbers person or whatever, don't worry about this. But if you're 3 times as efficient, you can walk, 3 times as much distance for a banana's worth of food. What that means is the area that's accessible to you is the square of the radius. So if you can walk 3 times, if you can walk 3 times as far as I can, then you have 9 times as much area accessible to you. So if you wake up in the morning, you can say, I want to go get some water, I want to go get some food, or I want to go over here. You can go to any of those places, whereas my options are much more limited because I'm much less efficient at walking. So everything from the structure of our feet to the size of our ribs with less intestines, our rib cages, you can just feel it on your own body. Your rib cage is basically cylindrical. Gorillas flare way out. And in the book, I have a picture of a human skeleton and a gorilla skeleton, and and Neanderthals were the same way. Their ribs flared way out because they had huge intestines, because they were eating a lot of plant matter. Whereas we were more efficient, we're better with tools, we can cook food, and this affects, not only how we lived and how much time we were spending on basic, tasks to get through the day, but also it affects our bodies. It's affected the shape of our bodies, the size of our heads, the size of our hips, the size of our ribs. So I have a section in the book called "Disruption is in Your Bones." It's all about how how you have been shaped by hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, and just the fact that with better tools we get more meat, we get larger heads, we get larger brains. and we can spend our days, thinking about solving problems and coming up with smart solutions rather than just sitting around in the bushes and eating leaves.
It's so fascinating. And I also loved because you also mentioned then that since we have smaller hips, we have also babies that are born way sooner, right? And they're
Yes.
more, um, yeah. Can you?
Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, humans are helpless. We are when we're babies. The first years of our life, I mean, it's constant attention from parents, which means that we need to live in small groups because you have to, just taking care of a child is something that you just need other people. Even today, if you live on your own, if a woman has a baby on her own, you still go out to the supermarket and get food. You still, flip a light switch, and there's somebody at the other ends of all of these things, making certain that there's food on the shelves at the supermarket, and your lights work and you can do your job and whatever else. So we are social animals by nature, and as a result, we can be much more innovative. Somebody comes up with an idea, it can spread through a group. We've seen this, as I said before, with whales. Whales live in small pods. Chimpanzees live in small troops, but we live in groups of even by the invention of agriculture, it was thousands of people, or hundreds or thousands, and larger than what we can sort of hold in our heads. There's a very famous person named Robert Dunbar who studied the size of the brain size versus group size. So how big the brain of an animal is versus how big of a group they live in. And we live in the largest groups, of complex animals. We live in millions of people work together to elect a leader, for instance, and no animal species does that. We're able to do these things because we have larger brains, because we're social animals. And part of that, a very great part of our lives today is shaped by the technology that we make, the tools that we've made. So how we live, whether you hunt for food or grow food, fundamentally as a society is based on the tools that you have. And whether you personally grow food for a living or whether you do something else is based on the tools and technology we have, not just the inventions, but also how affordable, how cheap or expensive they are. So 100 years ago, half of people were farmers. In Europe, in the US, something like 40% of people in the US were farmers in the year 1900. Now it's more like 2%, or even less. And it's because of technology. One person can do the work of 50, thus freeing up the other people to do something else with their day. And as a result, we've have people that have jobs today that just didn't exist 100 years ago. Um, and we can do things that were science fiction 100 years ago. I read this wonderful book called Mizora, Mizora. It's a woman named Mary Lane who wrote about this utopian fantasy world where, among other things, they powered everything with hydrogen. So they had clean, cheap power. They had vehicles that could drive themselves. Because power was cheap, everyone has a greenhouse built into their home where you could have fresh flowers and fruits and vegetables all year long. And they had mirror. She wrote this book in 1880. I mean, this is 150 years ago. And she said there would be mirrors where you can stand in front of the mirror and talk to your friends and see their face and hear their voice as if they were standing in front of you.
What?
And I mean, yeah, we have this now. And we have these technologies now, and we don't quite have cars that drive themselves yet, but we're very close. I mean, there are robo-taxi services. They're not everywhere yet, but they do exist. Um, and she said, and all of the work around the home will be done by machines. Everything, so you don't have to wash or scrub. You don't have to wash the laundry on your own or wash your floors. It's all done by machines, and we're close to that too. Certainly we've automated a lot of things with clothes washing and dishwashing and whatever, but we're almost at the point of human-like robots that walk around your home. We have little ones, that will vacuum the floor now, and we're on the cusp of ones that can do everything else too. So people have these ideas. Like I said, Neanderthals were scratching, designs onto cave walls. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, we were drawing pictures of people with wings, saying, everybody's wanted to fly for tens of thousands of years. We've dreamt of it. So every new idea starts out with a drawing, a written book, a description, a science fiction TV series or something that describes an idea. It always starts with ideation. It starts with a new idea being expressed, and then actually making the invention and making it work, and then making it cheap enough that it's ubiquitous and most people can own it are later steps. But it starts with coming up with the idea, then you have to invent the product, then you make it cheap enough that everyone can afford one, and then it takes over the world. And we've seen this pattern again and again. Um, and yeah, and now we're seeing it in communications. We're seeing it. We've already seen it in agriculture, and we're soon seeing it now in the near future in transportation and labor and healthcare and other aspects of life.
It's so fascinating, seriously. Can you maybe go a little bit into that? So once we have the ideation, what you were saying, then the whole process of everything starts to have that pattern. Um, how do we disrupt? Because you mentioned four types of disruption in your book, right? Can you
Hmm.
go into these four types of disruption and what they entail?
Okay, sure. So I'm not the only, I was taking other people's work here and summarizing it. Basically, I'm not the only one who's noticed this before. And like I said, most of my book is sort of a compilation of ideas, and part of that compilation is how disruptions happen. So there's a very famous book written in 1997 by a man named Clayton Christensen called The Innovator's Dilemma, where he said, look at how many companies there are that have been disrupted. He came up with this idea of disruptive innovation, disruptive technologies. So if you ever hear, people in Silicon Valley or business people talk about disruption all the time, that started with that book, where he said, there are different kinds of innovations. Somebody comes up with an idea, a new type of touchpad for the laptop or something, and it's better and they like it. That's wonderful, and it makes a new technology a little bit better. But that's not really fundamentally, it doesn't really fundamentally change the industry. A new touchpad or a slightly different camera or something like that. Those are sustaining innovations. And we get that all the time. Every product designer wants to take a product and make it better in some way. But some technologies and innovations are fundamentally different from the way that things used to be done. Um, and if you are in the old industry, you know that you can recognize these technologies because you realize that you're completely irrelevant in this world. So when blacksmiths saw the car, they said, these things don't have hooves, they don't have horseshoes. I have no real job in this thing. I have to learn to make cars or fix cars, car repair, something like that. Because all of my knowledge about horses is now basically useless. Um, Same thing with film cameras and digital cameras. When you saw a digital camera and it doesn't have any film in it, and you are a chemical engineer like me, a lot of chemical engineers were making photographic film, all of a sudden, your skills are useless. So uh, Christensen talks about, we've seen this before of a new technology comes along, it's cheaper and not as well performing. Incumbents will make fun of it and call it a toy and call it useless. They did that with digital cameras because digital cameras could only take very small pictures. It was like 300 pixels by 200 pixels. And so no serious photographer who works in a fashion magazine or National Geographic or anyone, who takes photographs for a living, no serious filmmaker will use digital cameras. And that was like early 1990s. 10, 15 years later, George Lucas is making, all digital Star Wars. And the whole movie industry shifted over from only film. And there are some directors that still, sort of use old techniques for film and special effects and that kind of stuff. But it's largely it's almost entirely shifted over to digital technologies. Um, so, so incumbents will make fun of a technology, calling it a toy, saying it's useless, but then it gets better over time, and it can often get better very quickly, and take over the market very quickly. And he wrote that book, The Innovator's Dilemma, basically about technologies that work that way. They start out lower performing, lower price, and they get better over time and take over a market. Um, and Tony Seba noticed that this isn't the only way that technology can take over the market. So the iPhone didn't do that. When the iPhone came out, it was more expensive than handheld phones. The Tesla Model S didn't do that. When that came out, that was a very expensive car. It wasn't, it was a full-sized luxury vehicle. There are cases where new entrants enter the market at a higher performing and higher price and then get cheaper over time. So he said that Clayton Christensen's view of some technologies start out cheaper and get better performing are what he calls a disruption from below. If a new technology starts out, higher performing and higher price, and then gets lower price over time, that's a disruption from above. So that's the iPhone, the Tesla Model S. Other technologies he calls a big bang. You often see this in medical technologies, where there's just the old way of doing things and then the new way, and it's just a complete changeover, and often driven by regulations and very extensive testing to make certain that something works, and then it quickly takes over the market. And then another kind of disruption he calls architectural disruptions, where it just makes the old way of delivering a product or service completely obsolete. So if everyone has solar panels on their roof and a backup battery system in their home, people won't need a wire coming into their home anymore, or need it very much. So the whole architecture of delivering electricity the way that we're doing now would change completely. So that's a very quick rundown, but from above, from below, big bang, and architectural are different ways that a technology can take over a market. But most of them involve incumbents making fun of the new technology, saying it's a toy for the rich or something like that, or it's for people who have more money than brains, and it'll never be a successful product, or whatever. And they say that right up until the point that they declare bankruptcy, and because they didn't pay attention to streaming video replacing Blockbuster, or cars replacing horses, or digital cameras replacing film cameras.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that we dismiss the new as a toy or something? Well, this won't. Is there something systemic behind? Is there something also that we are just used to see what we know, and then we forget that things change? Why do we just disregard the change?
Yeah, I think part is psychological. So if you know something and you know how it works, you've grown up around horses your whole life, then you just can't imagine getting rid of that and doing something a different way. Of why would I? When the internet came out, and you can open up a browser window and read the news on your computer, it's like, why would I? I get a newspaper delivered every day. I wake up in the morning and you open the front door and there's a newspaper there. Why do I need to go to the computer room and sit in front of the computer and log on to the internet when I could just be reading the newspaper? So part of it's psychological. I think part is just nobody's lived for 200,000 years and has seen all of these technologies. So we've seen what's happened in our lifetime, and it's very easy to get used to the new way of doing things, the digital cameras and internet communications and whatever, that you forget just how difficult things were, or just don't really know how things were when you were a kid and they were done a different way, or before you were born and they were done an even different way. So I think part is I'm hoping that a large part is just lack of perspective from not having seen enough examples, and I'm hoping that my book kind of rectifies that to some degree. Of if you read the book, you'll see a lot of examples. Like I said, I looked through about 1,500 examples for research. I chose what I thought were about the most interesting, about top 10%, so roughly 150 or so. And those are the ones that I write about in the book. So if you read the book, you get 150 examples at least from all different aspects of life: energy and transportation and food and healthcare and things. And hopefully we'll be able to see the pattern, as it's happening. See robo taxis on the road in the U.S. now and in China. and say, okay, this feels like the iPhone. This is like, yes, this is the way riding in a car should be. The car pulls up, you get in, it takes you to your destination, drops you off. The car is electric, so it doesn't make much noise. It doesn't emit pollution. It always stops for pedestrians. You know, you get to your destination, and you never have to worry about maintaining a car. You're not going to own the car. You're just going to use it as a taxi service. Um, and that's the way cars should be, and not having our cities taken over by you know vehicles parked on along every street, every available space. And we can give our cities back to people the way they were before cars came along.
And yeah, I love that vision. Yeah, it's I can see a little bit of transformation right now here in Barcelona, where I'm based, and they're little by little transforming it into a little bit of green islands,
Hmm.
call it. So getting a little bit rid of the cars, but I think what you're describing is so much more advanced of a vision that I think right now they're still building all the roads anyways. But which one would you say is the most, I don't know, the example that you like, one of the examples you like most from your book?
Oh, I mean, I sort of like all of them, and I get excited about talking about any one of them. I mean, there's things that just seem, so trivial in life, that you don't even think about them. But I saw disruptions in carpenter's nails. So in the late 1700s and before that, we would make nails by just basically taking a rod of iron, and you'd cut it to length and would beat the end of it into a sharp point, and you'd beat the other end flat into a flat plate and throw it onto a pile. And it was very labor intensive. Slaves did this. It was, children did it. It's not particularly skilled work. It does involve some skill, but it was something that children could do. So we had 10, 11, 12-year-old boys doing this. And there have been piles of nails that were found that the Romans left in England, or whatever, that were just, it was a lot of work to make these. And in the late 1700s, early 1800s, over about a 15-year period, we started making nails a new way, which is taking a flat iron sheet and just cutting it, not directly across, but at a slight angle, so it makes kind of a wedge shape. And then beat that flat. So instead of cutting a rod and shaping it into a nail, just cutting a flat sheet as a cut nail. And this completely changed construction. So now nails became so cheap that we used to make houses by taking big beams and cutting them on the ends so that they'd interlock, and then putting a peg through there, and you basically build a house frame the way that you'd build a table. You have these big beams that all interlock with each other. Um, but if nails are cheap, you don't have to spend all of your time cutting big, thick, tree trunks so that they interlock with each other. You can cut boards. So with steam-powered sawmills, cut boards into standard sizes, into standard shapes, standard sizes. So dimensional lumber, it's called. And then you just nail boards together to make a wall. You frame a wall. So you have a stack of standardized parts, basically, and you assemble them into the shape that you want. So instead of sort of cutting down big tree trunks and putting them together, you're taking standard sized boards and building up instead. So who would have anticipated that making nails cheaper would transform everything about how we build houses? And overall, it meant a lot less labor for houses. It's something like half the labor, 40% less. So housing got cheaper. We got larger rooms, more rooms per person, just because of this one innovation. But when you start looking at examples, little things like carpenter's nails changed, and but sort of everywhere in life, you can find examples. I would read just for fun when I was writing the book, just to stop thinking about technology and disruptions. I'd pick up articles and read something that was not related to technology in any way at all, like crystal meth and heroin and fentanyl, and how the problem with drug smugglers trying to bring drugs. Um, And this one article that I read was talking about how new drugs like fentanyl and crystal meth were taking over the market. Fentanyl is replacing heroin, and different means of making crystal methamphetamines. So one was from a chemical called ephedrine. So you used to get pseudoephedrine in cough syrup. And people would buy cough syrup, and you get, cough syrup comes in small bottles, so you can make a small amount of crystal meth. Um, and the U.S. government made it more difficult to buy large amounts of cough syrup in the U.S. So smugglers switched to a chemical called phenyl-2-propanone, which you can make from like paint thinner, and you can buy giant barrels of the chemicals to make it, and you can now make crystal meth much cheaper than you could make it. Much cheaper than you could make it using cough syrup. So the problem became much worse. Here, lawmakers were trying to make it more difficult to get your hands on the chemicals to make crystal meth, and they wound up making it much cheaper, and the problem much worse. And they showed the data for how much of crystal meth was made from pseudoephedrine, from cough syrup, and how much was made from phenyl-2-propanone, like paint thinner, basically. And it forms an X-shaped curve that looks just like all the other ones I had seen before over just a few year period. And that's why that one went into my book as well. So from carpenter's nails to crystal meth, to nuclear weapons, to cars, to cassette tapes and CDs, and just all different technologies. We saw this. You see the same pattern. I saw the same pattern again and again. So I don't know if I really have a favorite individual example, but there's just so many examples like that of a new technology comes along, one simple idea, let's cut nails rather than beat them from a wire rod. And it makes them cheaper. It changes all of building construction as a result of that, and has all these unintended consequences just from effectively an economic change and a technology change. So just I love these sort of unintended consequences, and and learning about the connections between technologies and history, but also just learning about this basic pattern because it's still going on today and presumably will go on in the future as well. So it's not just a way of learning about history and examples from the past, it's also a way of having a framework for thinking about the future and what's happening now and in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years to transportation, to energy, to food and agriculture. And yeah, so I think some of my favorite examples are also the ones that are happening now of, I'm just fascinated by these cars that drive themselves and humanoid robots and, everything else that's genetic engineering, where we're now making milk proteins from cow's milk without any cows. We're sort of cutting cows out of the process of making real cow's milk. And when you look at just how much of like land use in the world is for livestock, something like 1% of all the land area, so not the oceans, but just the surface area of the earth that's not ocean. Something like 1% is our cities. About 27% is for our livestock. So we use
27.
27%. It's basically all of North and South America is for livestock and for animals and for growing the crops to feed those animals. And I mean, basically the whole center third of the U.S. used to be prairies filled with buffalo, and it's now cornfields to feed livestock, to feed chickens, basically, and to feed cattle. And large parts of that isn't even used for food. We grow corn in the U.S. 40% of all of the corn so maize that we grow in the U.S. Is turned into ethanol and put into gasoline for cars. So we're burning food. So we're using immense amounts of land. This uses huge amounts of water, of electricity and power, of fossil fuels to run the tractors, to plow the fields, to grow the corn, to turn into ethanol that you put into your car so that you can drive to the grocery store and buy broccoli when or whatever, when you could have like a little rolling car, a little, just a cooler with 4 little wheels, if it was electric and could drive itself, just roll down the sidewalk and bring food to you. You don't have to go to a grocery store to buy food. if it could come to you. So just things like that, of how many of our problems that we have today, environmental problems, social problems, health problems, are all interconnected and all come back to these basic issues of food and energy, transportation, and the materials that we make and how we live our lives. And that's shaped by the technology that we have and whatever is the cheapest and easiest thing to do. If it's cheap and easy to have a online conversation, we do that. And if it's cheap and easy to buy cow's milk that's made from genetically modified yeast and brewed like we brew beer, they're brewing milk, basically they're and milk proteins. Basically, the way that we brew beer. So, if it's cheap and easy to brew milk proteins and it's cheaper and easier than using cows, then we'll stop using cows. If it's cheaper and easier to hop in a robo taxi and ride to your destination in an electric car, we'll do that. And right now, it's easier to own an electric car, at least in Norway, than a one that burns fuel. So the switch has already happened. Excuse me. The switch has already happened. New electric car sales in Norway are more than 90%. 90% of new car sales are electric. So people aren't buying fossil fuel cars anymore because they're cheaper to operate. It's less maintenance. Um, um, and it's just easier. So as technology, it's cheaper to take digital photos than film photos. It's easier to share them. So people switched over. We don't have to have, government programs. We didn't have to have a government program to force people to buy digital cameras and turn in your film camera. If you make something cheap and easy, and it's a better product and lower cost, people will rush with waving money to buy the new thing rather than use the old one.
And quick question there with the old infrastructure, because I mean, these technologies are getting cheaper and cheaper, especially, I mean, you mentioned wind, solar, and batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe first, can you explain a little bit what you picture, what our energy will look like in the future?
Sure. So Rethink X, the not-for-profit organization that I work for, looks at how technologies change economically over time, change in performance, how they're adopted by the marketplace. So we have a variety of reports. It's a not-for-profit organization, so they're available for free as PDFs at rethinkx.com. But over the past years that I've worked here, I've been here since 2018, right after the Rethinking Transportation 2020 to 2030 report was published. So I wasn't involved in that one. But since then, we've looked at, how genetic engineered microorganisms can produce individual molecules. So basically how it can brew milk proteins or fats or other sort of biological molecules, dyes, for the fashion clothing industry, things like that. We've looked at the future of energy and how solar and wind and batteries are affecting the future of energy, and how lithium-ion batteries are obviously a key part of electric cars. And how all these things are connected. So I really can't do, my book specifically isn't, doesn't try to lay out the whole case for what we think will happen with energy, because we already have the Rethinking Energy 2020 to 2030 report, which came out in 2020. And just earlier this year, we published Understanding Stellar Energy, which is sort of an updated thinking about that. But a real simple summary of our thinking about energy is, solar panels are much, much cheaper now than they were 10 or 15 years ago. They're a tenth of the price. Lithium-ion batteries are too, and even wind turbines are cheaper than they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And as a result, this is the cheapest form of new power basically everywhere in the world. And if you're going to, let's say that you wanted to build a system that was 100% solar, wind, and battery powered system. So we started with that question: how many solar panels would you need, wind turbines, and batteries? And we selected some locations around the world, some of which are sunnier, some of which are, so we looked at Germany, we looked at California, we looked at other parts of the U.S., we looked at Alaska. And we said, how much solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries would you need to be 100% SWB? We call it solar, wind, and battery powered. And it turns out for many places in the world, it's surprisingly affordable. The places that we looked at in our first report, it's surprisingly affordable. Um, and then on top of that, it has unintended consequences, like I said, with any new technology, one of which is um, uh, if you have, here I live in Norway, or if you live in Germany or somewhere a little further south, you get longer, more sunshine in the summertime and less in the winter. There are windier parts of the year and less windy parts. There are times when it's overcast quite a bit and times when it's sunnier. So we took real weather data. We took real data on the performance of solar panels and wind turbines. So not just, in theory, but the actual hourly performance data from these technologies. And we found, if you want to have a large enough system to get you through the year, you have to worry about the sort of 2 or 3 worst weeks of the year in terms of sunshine and wind. What are the least sunny, least windy times of the year when you're reliant on batteries? Because that's that determines the size of the battery system that you'll need. Um, and people before us said, this will take, you'll need weeks worth of batteries. It's so expensive. It'll be such a large system that you won't. It's just economically not feasible. And our analysis showed, no, actually, it's pretty reasonable. The times of the year when it's not sunny, the wind tends to blow. The times of the day, the wind tends to blow more in the mornings and the afternoons, and sunshine during the day. So you really only have to get through a few hours at night. And then throughout the course of the year, the times of the year, the spring and autumn tend to be the windiest times of the year. So if you design your system that gets you through the least sunny, least windy 2 or 3 weeks of the year, then you just have an incredible superabundance of power the other weeks of the year. And we did the calculations, and if it's the worst 2 weeks of the year that you have to get through, the other 50 weeks of the year, you just have a staggering amount of power at zero marginal cost. You're not paying for fuel or anything. You've paid for the solar panels. You have them on your roof. You've paid for the batteries, or the roofs of commercial buildings. They might be more centralized, or the batteries might be more spread out. But regardless of where they're physically located, 50 weeks of the year, you're getting so much power that you're going to have to look for things to do with it, because it's free power. It's the wind is blowing, the sun is shining, and your batteries are full. So what are you going to do with all of that energy? Um, and it's an incredible superabundance of power, or what we call superpower. The other weeks of the year, there's one bottleneck in each year, basically, in any part of the world, and then the rest of the time, it's an incredible superabundance of power. And that was sort of our first report in 2020, and then our updated one. We built a software tool where you can select a location on Earth. So rather than the 6 locations that we looked at for our first report, it's a software tool where if you want to do this in your city, your country, whatever else, we can do the analysis for you for your location. We built the software tool, but we're a not-for-profit organization, so we really can't, do for-profit consulting and call ourselves a not-for-profit organization. So we split off a for-profit branch that has just started operating this year. It's called NavigateX. So they're at navigatex.tech. And that's the sort of for-profit consulting branch that uses things like this Superpower Explorer tool that we've built, that will help governments, cities, major corporations. I don't know exactly who they're talking to, because I work for the not-for-profit side of the business, but helping them figure out, how to get to this world of just an incredible abundance of energy. And then, because with that, you can have basically free transportation, food becomes cheaper, anything you want to do, ecological restoration, pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, desalination of water, recycling of garbage, everything becomes cheaper and easier. Um, and it's all a matter of building up sort of this stockpile of solar panels, wind turbines, this stockpile of energy generating assets. And at some point, you reach what we call the ignition point, the point where the system is generating so much power that you are looking for uses for it. Um, and our co-founders, Rethink X's co-founders, Tony Seba and James Arbeb, have written a book just on this concept of a world of incredible abundance of, everything, energy being the source of it. And that book is called Stellar, and they describe, how to get to this world of energy abundance, and thus, better health, better nutrition, better, easier transportation, better relationship with the environment, better relationship with each other, a world where we don't have to fight over limited resources and shipping lanes and whatever else we're fighting over now, just because we have this, this world where literally for the first time since the invention of fire, for literally hundreds of thousands of years, we've had to burn things to get energy, to get light. And we are now at the first time, in hundreds of thousands of years where we can create light without burning anything, where we can move a vehicle without burning anything, where we can, power our whole society without having factories whose power plants that burn coal or burn natural gas or anything else just to get the energy from it. We can just literally harvest energy from sunlight and from the wind, store it in batteries, and not have to worry about CO2 emissions. So all of these problems that have seemed so intractable for decades, like how do we get to zero net emissions, could be much, much easier to get to than we think if it's just a matter of the economics of these new technologies.
It's so exciting to hear you talk because
Mhm,
it opens up so many possibilities. And I'm gonna just tackle a few of the main counter arguments that I've heard so many times in the space of sustainability.
mhm,
Because I think it was what you're saying, right? We've been all this time always burning stuff to create energy. So I think it's not just the technological shift, but it's like a paradigm shift that we totally need to wrap our heads around. Okay, there is a new way of doing things. Um, so first, what about these old infrastructures that I mean, you worked at the company that built the pipeline. Um, are they gonna just say like, okay, sure, we just transition everything now to the solar, wind, and battery system, where suddenly also we don't have any real control over, because what that also would mean in some way or another is disrupting completely the existence also of the whole industry of oil, the whole industry of fossil fuels, mm, and they have a lot of power, a lot of lobby power.
mhm.
How do you see how do you see that in that transition?
I think we've seen many, many cases of very powerful incumbents who were not very powerful when a new technology came along. Um, so yes, the fossil fuel industry, oil, some of their big products are burned. They also make plastics. So the fossil fuel industry, the basic problem is that we're burning fossil fuels and creating pollution, and it's not just climate change related issues, but just personal health of uh, so I live across the street from my son's school, and I remember, now there are more electric cars in Norway, but in the wintertime, you see cars all lined up to pick the kids up after school, and you can see, the pollution coming out of the tailpipes of the cars, and the kids run out to the car and they're run through pollution, to get to get to their into their car. Um, and just living in urban areas, urban air quality. This isn't just a matter of global CO2 issues. This is also sort of personal health related issues. Um, And so if we were using oil to make durable plastics or things like that, I think we're going to be doing that in the future. Maybe we'll have microorganisms that are making biodegradable proteins and things that will replace plastic. But it looks like we're going to have these industries in the foreseeable future for things like materials, durable plastics for car bodies and whatever, the handle of a hammer or something like that, because they're lightweight and they're durable. Um, um, but as far as burning things go, we don't have to burn fuel to move a vehicle anymore. And if you've ridden in an electric car and you've seen how much easier they are to maintain, everyone who buys one says, it's so much easier. All I have to do is replace the windshield washing fluid, and I plug it in at night like I plug in my phone, and it charges. And it's so convenient, and I don't have to worry about the timing belt or that there's an oil change or an oil leak or anything else. And it's just so much easier technology. So yes, the oil industry is enormous, but so is the car industry. And we're seeing what's happening now with companies like Tesla and BYD, that didn't exist 20 years ago, and were niche players 10 years ago, and now Tesla is the biggest by market capitalization car maker in the world. BYD, which is a Chinese company, um, is a major producer and exporter. China in 2020, so 5 years ago, at the start of the COVID epidemic, if you look at the biggest car exporters in the world, car exporting countries, uh, Germany and Japan, South Korea, the U.S. and China. China was number 5 on that list 5 years ago. They're number 1 now, um, and and growing dramatically. So, and they're doing it on the back of of this new technology of electric vehicles that makes vehicles that are cheaper. That we're seeing vehicles now that you really aren't selling in North America or in Europe, but they are selling them in other parts of the world that are smaller vehicles that are cheap, that are easy to maintain, cheap to operate, and people love them because. If your choice is between not having a car or having this one, or it's between some sort of scooter or bicycle versus a small electric car, people are snapping up these small electric cars, and maybe they don't have the range of a larger, more expensive electric car or a larger, more expensive fossil fuel car, but they're cheap to buy and they're cheap to maintain, and people love them. So the market is growing rapidly because the cost of the components, the batteries and the electric motor components is coming down. So if we take away you know, cars and trucks are half of the use of fossil fuels in the world. We turn it into gasoline. We turn crude oil into diesel fuel. We're seeing electric trucks now. We're seeing small electric airplanes, electric ferries, electric boats, electric cars, electric scooters, electric bicycles are very popular. All of these eating into car ownership, or just the use of fossil fuel cars. Fossil fuel cars had their greatest sales peak in, I think, 2017, 2018, and they've gone down every year since then. Um, so if you take away this use of fossil fuels, then you're going to take away the customer. This is the use of oil. So whether big oil companies lobby a lot, it doesn't really matter at that point. If people want their electric cars, their small electric car, their electric scooter, their electric bicycle, their whatever else, their electric robo-taxi, there's really nothing that car makers can do in response except meet that demand. And that means that there's nothing that oil companies will do in response except switch to, make more plastics or petrochemicals and less for fuel, for instance. So this is going to be enormously disruptive to, the car industry. It already is. Electric cars are already disruptive to incumbent car manufacturers. It'll be disruptive to oil companies. But there used to be the whale oil industry, right? That was like the 5th largest industry in the US, where we go out and hunt whales. And that collapsed over about a 10-year period, because of kerosene, basically because we figured out how to make a fuel out of not oil, but it was bitumen, so basically asphalt. Um, um, so we've seen, these disruptions before. The oil industry started out as a disruptor. They disrupted the hunting whales for oil, and they might get disrupted by these electric car technologies, and then if you have microorganisms that are making cow's milk proteins, then you don't need to grow all of the food to feed to cows. It's much more efficient just to feed yeast instead. So therefore, we'll need to grow a lot less crops. As I said earlier, something like 40% of all of the corn, which is the largest crop in the US, is grown to make ethanol. So if you're not driving cars, you don't need the ethanol. If you're not feeding the crops to cattle to make milk or to make meat, if you're just growing that directly using microorganisms, then much of the agriculture industry, of the huge areas of land that we're using to grow crops, could be disrupted as well, which means that there'll be much less need for the natural gas to make into fertilizer, the diesel fuel to run the tractors. So all of this is interconnected, and these disruptions that are happening in energy, in food, in transportation are all affecting each other. So whether or not you were the wealthiest, most powerful whale oil captain in the world in the 1850s, you were out of business a couple of decades later, and disrupted by the new technology. And the same is happening now with electric cars, with yeast that brew milk as opposed to brew beer, with all of the technologies that RethinkX talks about in our reports. That, as I said, you can get freely available at rethinkx.com.
Fascinating, really fascinating. Can you maybe explain a little bit how then do we still need the typical idea of a energy grid? How is going to be the infrastructure looking like? Maybe can you help us navigate that? Is it going to be a little bit more decentralized?
I think it'll be a lot more decentralized. So a system that's based 100% on solar, wind, and batteries. You could have batteries in people's homes. You can have solar panels on their roofs, on commercial buildings. We're seeing now fences that are made of solar panels, because it's cheaper and better to just make a fence out of solar panels, or siding for houses. There are buildings now that are just covered entirely in solar panels on the sun-facing sides to them, because they're cheap enough that we can use them as siding now. So I mentioned in my book that the head of Norway's Petroleum Directorate, which is their government authority that runs governs the oil industry, which is Norway's largest industry. Half of Norway's exports are oil and gas. The Petroleum Directorate, their headquarters building, is covered in solar panels. You know, if the Norwegian government authorities, who oversee their biggest industry, the oil and gas industry, have covered their own Petroleum Directorate's headquarter building in solar panels, maybe they know something about the future of energy that everyone else isn't paying attention to. But yeah, so I think, as far as the overall grid goes, with wind turbines, there's always the advantage of having them be as large as possible, as tall as possible, because higher up in the air, the wind blows more. Down at ground level, it gets interrupted by trees and houses. So little wind turbines on the roof of your house are never going to be as efficient as these giant wind turbines that utility companies are building, and that's why they're building them offshore and on ridges of mountains and other windy places. So I think we're going to need the grid for getting power from wind turbines to people's houses, but that could be much less than we have now. We are seeing people who are going off grid with solar panels and batteries, and so yeah, I think the grid looks a lot different in the future. It's not going to be people buying 100% of their power through a grid. It'll be a lot less delivered through a grid, and a lot more through just solar panels on people's roofs, on the roofs of industrial buildings, charging batteries locally, and not just the physical infrastructure of the grid, but also sort of the laws around it of how it works. A lot of places in the world, you're not allowed to sell power to your neighbors. So if you have solar panels on your roof and you're producing an excess of power, you're not legally allowed to collect money for selling that to someone who lives right next door to you, because now you're competing with the utility companies and now you're a business of selling power. And just this idea that you can't do that I think the law will have to change as it has before. As technology changes, the law changes to keep up with it, and that will happen with the electrical grid as well.
And what about the externalities that batteries have, solar panels as well? Their recycling is kind of dangerous or has some sort of externalities as well, rare materials, metals. How are you seeing that?
I think largely it's an energy issue. In a world of cheap energy, you have solar panels, you have wind turbines that are producing a huge excess of power because, like I said, you're trying to get through those couple worst weeks of the year. So you just have an extreme excess of power the other weeks of the year. We'll be looking for uses of that power. And one of them is recycling materials. We know that we can recycle batteries. There are companies that are devoted to it. One of the men who designed Tesla's car, a man named J.B. Straubel, left Tesla and started a battery recycling company because he realizes this is all part of this. So it's called Redwood Materials. This is all part of this chain of producing the materials, turning them into cars and batteries. Eventually, these things reach the end of their life. You're going to recycle them and turn them into the next generation of cars or batteries for reuse them for home use or things like that. Um, and this is largely an energy issue. We can recycle 99+% of the material from batteries just by taking them, breaking them apart. It's a labor issue. Um, so as we have, automated machinery that can disassemble old cars, they grind them up basically to dust. They extract the elements back again, and they make them into new generation of batteries. And we're seeing this. Solar panels are being recycled. We're now designing wind turbines to be more recyclable. In the past, they've used materials that were difficult to recycle. But we've been producing garbage, for decades, at large volume for decades, for hundreds of years, and storing it underground. We could go back and mine those materials, right? We could open up old landfills and harvest the material. It's a dirty, unpleasant job, but if you had robots doing it, chopping things up is largely an energy issue. It's always been easier to just haul garbage away, drop it in a hole, and cover it up with dirt than it has been to recycle. But if we have, more AI-driven automated machinery, and if energy is cheaper, then recycling metals becomes cheaper. Disassembling products so that they can be more easily recycled becomes cheaper and easier. Treating wastewater, taking polluted water, filtering it, desalinating water so that we have fresh water. Any sort of recycling or reuse, or taking land and planting trees on it, letting it rewild and restore to nature. All of this becomes easier. Um, if you have desalinated water, you can help to grow plants. So you have a degraded land that's sandy or whatever. You can grow plants there, let it return to nature because you can produce uh, fresh water at a lower cost because you have cheap energy. So everything keeps coming back to energy, energy prices, the price of, or just a few things: the price of energy, the price of labor, the price of transportation, and all of these are getting cheaper because of electric vehicles, because of solar, wind, and battery systems. Um, and this is one of the strongest correlations, that we've seen in the world, economically speaking. I have a graph of it in my book, which is the correlation between energy use and GDP per person. So the quality of your life is basically answered by the question of how much energy do you use in a year. And if you can turn on a light anytime you want, boil water to make tea or coffee anytime you want, if you can travel basically anywhere you want, anytime you want, and you use a lot of energy, you probably have a good quality of life. And of course, you can always waste energy and be inconsiderate and destroy things on purpose. And I'm not advocating that you do that. I'm just saying the parts of the world that are high energy consumption are high income, and that are high income that are high energy consumption. And this seems to be more than a correlation. It seems it's a causal connection. If you are able to afford to heat up water anytime you want and take a warm shower and have a cup of coffee anytime you want, if you're able to heat your house to the level that you want and cool it to the level that you want uh, throughout the year, if you have enough energy to run a refrigerator and can store food, then you live a much better life than people who don't have those options. So if we can make energy cheaper for people, transportation cheaper, then we're making everything else cheaper too. We're making water cheaper. We're making recycling materials cheaper, and as a result, we're expanding. You said earlier the possibilities. So and that's a phrase that I use in my book, the possibility space. When you make something cheaper, you start using it for things you wouldn't have used it for before. So digital cameras. Nobody would have a film camera at their front door to take a photograph when someone arrived at their front door. But with a digital camera, you have a digital doorbell. Somebody rings the doorbell, and you can see a picture of them on your phone live. You can talk to them, through the speaker. That's enabled by cheaper microphones, digital cameras, internet connections, and a cell phone. Those technologies together have enabled the digital doorbell. And when you have cheaper technology like that, it opens up new possibilities. And now I have a digital camera right in front of me. You have them on your back of your phone. They now have them in cars so that when you shift into reverse, you can see what's behind you. You have them on your doorbell. So we went from one camera per family, and it used film, and you used it a few times a year, to there's 5 cameras right in arm's reach of me right now. Um, so making something cheaper opens up the possibilities of what we do with it. And that's true with transportation. It's true with information and communications and cameras. And it's true with materials, and it's true with energy. The cheaper something is, we can recycle materials. We can pull CO2 out of the atmosphere later on after we get to net zero. We can we can restore degraded landscapes. We can use less land for growing crops because we're doing a much more efficient way of transport through electric vehicles. And when the vehicle or the solar panel or the battery or whatever else reaches the end of its life, we can recycle it much more cheaply and easily, and reuse those materials.
So, one counter argument from the degrowth movement is especially this idea of the paradox where every time that we have more energy available to us and it gets cheaper, we then also use even more energy. Um, do you see this at any moment be a problem?
I so yes, this idea, the Jevons paradox, it's called, that was noticed back in the 1800s, that as steam engines got more efficient, we didn't use less coal to get the same amount of work out of them. They're more efficient, so we built more of them, and we did things with them that they weren't really intended for. The steam engine was originally built just to pump water out of mines. And then as they got more efficient, we realized, hey, we can put them on wheels, and it's a whole new form of transportation. It's a train. Or we can use them to power factories. So we use more of them. The more efficient a technology gets, the more of it that we use. And I look at things like information technologies, so the computers that we use, the phones and whatever, or energy or anything, transportation. And how is that a bad thing if we use more of it? I mean, we use far more in terms of data and energy, data transfer and communications. It used to be you pick up a phone and you could hear someone's voice, and you got charged by the minute for how much you'd talk to someone, and international calls were really expensive. So you'd have to plan your conversation in advance of what you're going to talk about. Now we can have long conversations here over the internet, and it's not just voice, but we're seeing each other's faces. You could, group calls where a dozen people are all talking to each other and have virtual meetings. Is that not a good thing that we have that ability? Um, isn't that what technology that is for? Isn't that what we should use it for? How is it a bad thing if we have a lot of energy? Oh no, we have a lot of energy, so therefore I can heat my house and keep it comfortable, and I can, if someone, people can travel when they want, where they want, see their friends, and do things that they want to do with their lives. How is that a bad thing? So I think a lot of the problems are what people look at is the effects of doing these things. So traveling, driving right now, if you're burning fuel, you're producing CO2, and you're producing local air pollution. If you are yeah, you're heating your house, you're using a lot of energy. I live in Norway. It's 98% hydropower here. So there are dams that are producing the electricity. Wind power has gotten a little more popular. So maybe it's not 98% anymore. Maybe it's like 95%, but the other 5% is basically wind power. So it's basically 100% renewable energy. New car sales are now 95% plus electric cars. Something like a third of the cars on the road are electric. How is that a bad thing if people are going around and you say, okay, well, cars use urban space, and they create a landscape where we live separately from each other, and they're destroying our cities or something like that. But if we had cars that drove themselves as taxis that you didn't own, you just called a taxi when you wanted it, and it drove up to your house, then all the space that we have for parking could be, along the sides of streets, could be bicycle lanes. All the parking lots you could turn into apartment buildings. You could do whatever you want with it. So it's all about choices. What choice do you want to make? This possibility space that we were talking about, and having new technologies and having things be cheaper gives us new possibilities that we didn't have before. If we were paying a large amount of money per minute for this call, maybe we wouldn't be doing it this way. Maybe we'd be doing it voice only. But that's how it used to be. It used to just be physically impossible to do it, or it was very expensive. So traveling is good. Using energy is good. Taking photos and talking to friends is good. Listening to music whenever you want is good. That kind of stuff, or at least having the option to, is good. The bad things are the producing the CO2, car accidents that hurt people. But with artificial intelligence, and if we have cars that will stop and recognize a person in front of them and not run them over, we could, I don't know about completely eliminate, but hopefully we could eliminate car accidents. 100% solar, wind, and battery systems would eliminate CO2 production. We should have, as many people as possible living lives that are lives of flourishing and abundance. And you're not going to get to zero CO2 emissions by cutting back, right? It's the number of people times the amount of CO2 produced per person per year. So if you want to get that number to zero, you either have to cut the number of people to zero, which is a horrible thing to think about, or you have to get CO2 per person, per year to zero. And we can do that with solar, wind, and battery powered energy. And if we have, electric cars rather than cars that burn things, then we can get our transportation system to zero emissions, or at least net zero. So if you're flying internationally on a plane, we can, get as much CO2 out of the atmosphere if energy was cheap. So all of these things are good. I mean, the Jevons paradox, to me, it sounds like a wonderful problem to have, of too many people living lives that are too good and too pleasant, as opposed to the things that we've had throughout history, which is death and disease and infant mortality and women dying in childbirth. A lot of these issues have gone away more or less in the last 100 years or so in the wealthier parts of the world. We should want it to go away everywhere in the world. Yeah, and the way to do that is by um, with our knowledge, our tools, and making it cheap and affordable enough for everyone that everyone at least has the option to heat their home and eat dinner and boil some water and keep their food cold in a refrigerator, and all the things that we do every day and don't even think about. Everyone should have that option. And the way to get there, to this world of flourishing, what, as I said, what Tony Seba and James Arbild call it, a stellar world full of stellar humans living lives that are fulfilling lives, as opposed to lives of drudgery or deprivation, is by new technology, by technologies that are cheap enough that everyone can afford to do what they want to do with their lives, and not by cutting back and telling people that they can somehow get to zero emissions by just uh, you know taking technology that we have today and just using zero of it. Or don't have children, don't travel anywhere, don't eat what you want to eat, don't do anything that involves using energy, because the extreme to that is don't even breathe, because every time you breathe out, you produce CO2. So yeah, I think there's only one way forward, and that's a life of abundance for as many people as possible through clean technologies and cheap energy, cheap transportation, cheap communications, cheap uh, labor provided by machines, as opposed to humans doing things we don't want to do.
I think it's a beautiful path forward. And I think also the thing here is that it's such a paradigm shift. It's just so challenging, I think, for us to even think of that. Is everything that we've known, burning stuff to get energy, and then also everything is based on scarcity,
Yes.
right? So our whole economic system is based on that. So now we come and say, like, well, now we have abundance and now we have things available to us. How do you see a economic business model based on that? How do we transition from a scarcity based business model? Capitalism is essentially based on capitalizing scarcity. So suddenly, if we have things available in abundance, how do we still make a profit? How do we, yeah, still make and maintain a economic system? Maybe things will completely radically change suddenly. And do you see jobs still the same way that we used to have jobs? Because if machines are there to make things and energy is going to be almost freely available, how are we going to see this world? How are we going to operate?
I think it's an excellent question. It's not one that I really cover in the book. Maybe the book has 5 chapters. Maybe if it had 6, I would have a chapter on the economics of abundance, because most of the book looks back through examples throughout history, and then the last chapter deals with the technologies that are shaping the future now. But things like what are we going to do about jobs? What are we going to do with our lives? Like I said, we faced that same issue 125 years ago with agriculture. In the year 1900, 40% of people in the U.S. and Europe were farmers. And if you were to go back in time to the year 1900 and tell people, hey, in the next few decades, there'll be machines that will be doing, we'll have tractors, we'll have farm combines, and we're going to have 2% of people be farmers by the year 2000, 100 years from now, rather than 40%. People would say, well, what are people going to do with their lives? I get up every morning, I milk the cows, whatever, I work in the field, and where are we going to get our food from? And I was like, no, machines will do it. We'll have, one farmer will be able to drive over a field and do 15 times as much as you can do now. And therefore we'll need 2% of people being farmers, not 50%. And people would say, this sounds terrible, everybody will be unemployed. And there were terrible effects to new technologies in the early 1900s. We did it, with tractors. We plowed up whole sections of the U.S. And caused what was called the Dust Bowl era, where basically we tore up the topsoil, it blew away, and we ruined a lot of very good, prairie land. We've had, there have been all sorts of problems of new technologies of, machine guns. And we were fighting World War One with technology that our tactics hadn't changed to keep up with it. So we were just having waves of men run it up into machine guns and just get mowed down. And whatever, World War Two, and you look at the, technology for gas attacks in World War One, where we were able to make poisonous gases. We've killed each other. We've hurt each other with new technologies, and we've caused economic crises. Um, and there have been disruptions in the past that are like that, and we could reasonably see that again. If everybody switches over to an electric car, and I said, okay, the air will be nice in front of the school across the street from me, it will, but that also means there are whole countries that are based on exporting oil and gas. And do you think that Vladimir Putin is going down without a fight? If back in August of 2014, as I mentioned, there was this 50% drop in oil prices. In early 2020 with COVID, we had, if you remember, there were negative oil prices for a day where there wasn't enough storage space for oil. We thought that demand for oil and oil use would drop so much that we wouldn't have spaces to store it. So for a short time, if you had storage space, you could be paid to take oil away. Oil was, pollution as opposed to a useful product. So small changes in demand, a 2% drop in demand can result in a 50% drop in prices. And if we are seeing, perpetual decrease in number of fuel burning cars, and a rapid replacement by electric vehicles that are individually owned, or even faster disruption will be electric vehicles that are run as taxis. This could cause, whole regions of the world, Russia and Saudi Arabia and other major oil exporters, and not just entire countries, but some regions of countries, like in the U.S., the Gulf Coast and the parts of the U.S. where we have fracking, Alaska, are more oil dependent. So we could see, local recessions, local depressions, conflict as a result of this. It's not as if, it's only an upward path, and only beneficial. And we could easily, make huge mistakes like we did in the early 1900s of falling into massive wars with each other. We had depressions. We've had all sorts of economic and geopolitical problems. So I'm not saying that it's guaranteed that we'll avoid those things. But in the long run, as I see it, what happened with all of the farmers who were made unnecessary by farm machinery? They found work. The car industry in the early 1900s employed basically nobody. 25 years later, by the 1920s, something like 1 out of 7 people in the US were employed in the car industry one way or another. In the mid 1970s, basically nobody used a computer at work or anywhere else. By the mid 80s, late 1980s, something like a quarter of all workers use computers. So, these new technologies create new industries. There are people who are YouTube stars, whatever, just by choice. They started a YouTube channel, Mr. Beast. The guy has 400 million viewers, and he didn't need anyone's permission. He started when he was 12 years old or something like that, and grew his follower base. So we can create. There'll be new jobs of people doing what they want to do. The same way that today we have more music instructors than we've ever had before. Back in the late 1800s, you didn't have the time or ability to devote your life to music if you wanted to. Now, much more people can. There are more artists alive today than there ever have been before. There are more teachers. There are more people involved in healthcare and caring for each other. There are professional dog walkers, right? There are people who do nothing but walk dogs. We didn't have that 150 years ago. So we'll have new jobs that will appear, and maybe not new jobs, but new tasks. We will have we'll have to find some way for for people. I don't know what the answer is, if that's, universal basic income or something like that, but we'll have to rethink all of economics. We'll have to, because as you said, economics is based on scarcity. The basic definition of economics is allocating resources under a condition of scarcity. And if you don't have a condition of scarcity, if you're living in a world more like they live in Star Trek, where you at a push of a button you can have whatever you want, then we have to rethink how economics works. And I don't know exactly how it works on the Starship Enterprise, but we should probably study study that, because we have some of their technology now. The iPad, they had the iPads, they had little communicator devices where they pushed on their shirt and could talk to each other. We have basically those things now, little handheld devices where we can talk to each other and see each other. So if we have their technology, then we're going to have some of their economic thinking too. And we have to rethink it. And I'm not an economist by training, and I didn't write that chapter in the book. So somebody has to write, and rethink economics, and figure out how we'll make it work. But we've done it in the past, and we've had, in some cases, huge problems. So we have to rethink it in a way that we can avoid the depression, the world wars, the collapsing of empires, of oil empires, without it resulting in the negative consequences that we've seen before.
And what do you think could be things that could help us to navigate this so it doesn't happen? Exactly what you were saying, that
Well,
we
Well, the
have.
self-serving answer is read my book, The Pattern of Progress. The more people we have, yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of corny to say it, but we need the dreamers and we need the rethinkers. So Rethink X, we need the people who rethink economics, who rethink energy, who rethink transportation and food. And it all starts out with an idea. Like I said in the book, the first step in any new invention, any new technology, any new system or idea is coming up with the idea, expressing it in the form of a word or a literal picture drawn on the wall of a cave, a science fiction story. Mary Lane in her book Mizora, talking about a world where you have a greenhouse in every home and a mirror on the wall that you can talk to your friends just by looking at the mirror. So it starts out with these ideas. People have been talking about cars that drive themselves for decades. We've been talking about artificial intelligence for decades. People have been trying to build these systems, and we've never quite had the computer power. We've never quite had the algorithms, and now we do. We have computers that are generating images. You just prompt it by text. It will create an image or a short video clip. It will write text for you. And is it the best writing in the world? No, but it's better than nothing. And you can take it and add to it. But it all starts with, you have to start with ideation. You have to start with coming up with the idea, coming up with the conflict, the concept. And that's why these things often appear in in science fiction, in cartoons, and things like that. Of Dick Tracy, the investigator who had a wristwatch with a television set on it, and he could communicate by a two-way TV set on his wrist. It's easy to draw a picture of that. It's a lot more difficult to make it actually happen. So we drew a picture of it first, and then decades later, we now have wristwatches where you can do video communication. So we need the dreamers and the thinkers and the rethinkers and the people who challenge assumptions of, why do we have to burn things to get energy? Why do we have to have a driver to move a car? Why do we have to kill an animal to get meat? Why do we have to die? There are people, I don't talk about this much in the book, but there are people looking into, ways of radically extending human lifespan. We've already done it. Our average lifespan was half of what it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We already live twice as long on average as we used to. So we're living longer, healthier, happier, better lives. And that means that we need people who can think of these ideas and solve these problems. And that starts, I hope, with people understanding this pattern of progress, that, this is a pattern that has gone on for hundreds of years, and our ancestors faced many, the same problems that we do, of what to eat and how to keep warm and how to move around. And now we have tools that they could only dream of. And our lives are immeasurably better because of it on average. And I hope in the future people will look back and just say, why did we ever have machines that you could run over another person and kill a dog or kill a child or hurt? So there were people who lost their lives, lost limbs, just because somebody was distracted when driving a car. And why didn't you just put cameras on the front of the car and have the car stop if somebody was standing in front of it? And we have to explain, well, we didn't have the digital cameras, we didn't have the computer chips, we didn't have the artificial intelligence to recognize someone. And once we developed those things, once we had that convergence of technologies come together, we could have cars that could drive themselves, or cars that could make driving much safer. And therefore, cars that drove themselves took over the world. Um, and therefore we stopped running over dogs and children and each other. And yeah, and it's all a matter of people starting out with that question of why do we have to, people who challenge these assumptions and rethink, why do we have to kill animals to get food? Why do we have to, have car accidents? Why do we have to burn things to get energy? So we need, and there are still open questions, like you said. What is everybody going to do if we have robots? We have robots doing everything. I helped write a blog post last year called "This Time We Are the Horses," and I talked about how if we have robots, humanoid robots that can do our work for us, that will take care of elderly people in our homes, in their homes, so they can live lives that are independent. If they're doing the work for us, what will we do, and what will this mean for our society? And that's a blog post. We need people who can think more longer and more deeply on, rethinking economics, rethinking geopolitics, rethinking the social contract, rethinking education, rethinking, every aspect of life that I was not able to put into the chapter that doesn't exist, the chapter 6. So whoever wants to write that, feel free to start by reading reading my book, the first 5 chapters, and then add your own to the end, and let me know about it, please.
I think it's beautiful to have that call for action, and also just knowing that we are part of this change, right? That we are active agents here, and we need to be part of this, and that our talents are still required and needed. So because I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of just not knowing and being overwhelmed, and that's kind of paralyzing us all, right? So it's this thing of, ooh, it's just too much to even dream. But I think this is a beautiful call to action to just like go back to, no, we can dream, and we need to dream so that we have a beautiful transition to a real abundance. One question I have a little bit also into the direction of AI. How do you see compute power chips? Right now, it's very concentrated in just 1, 2 big companies, and we're gonna need a lot of this in the future. How do you see this?
Yeah, I think the demand for this technology is only growing. It has been, for decades. So I have a figure in my book of how much computing power you can get per $1,000, and going back to the 1800s, late 1800s, with tabulating machines that were mechanical, and then we had vacuum tube based machines, and then we had discrete transistor machines, and then we have integrated circuits of CPUs. Now we're using GPUs, so graphics processing units. So who in the world would have known, 20, 30 years ago, that the chips that we were making for computer games would be the ones, that are are empowering AI. So back, when you're playing video games and your parents tell you, "Hey, stop playing those dumb games," and if only I knew, I could have told them, "Hey, no, I'm powering the AI future that will unlock, all these other new technologies." But yeah, I think the demand for processing power is only growing. Which means the demand for energy for these processing centers is growing. Um, A few places in the world could legitimately be the winners of this, of not just making the hardware, but also just whoever reaches, an AI-based economy, if you will, first. Whoever unlocks, this sort of general intelligence through, a computer chip that thinks like a human or better than a human, and then you are making copies of them. You could have, we could have not just computer chips, but each of those could be, if implanted in a humanoid robot, every person could have, a half a dozen other machines doing their work for them. So now landscaping and cleaning the house and moving things around. So I think the demand for this is only growing over time. It the trend hasn't slowed down in 100 years or more. Um, it's not stopping. It's not slowing down. We're just seeing greater and greater demand, and it does result in a few companies, like you said, a few places in the world, Taiwan and the Netherlands, in terms of computer chips and the technologies to make them, and then the software. Silicon Valley, China, a couple of other places, but we are realistically looking at a couple of places in the world that pull ahead of everywhere else. And if we're not careful with that, then we really, we could see a huge split, as we do now economically, with parts of the world that where people live lives that are 10 times higher income, 10 times higher consumption than other parts of the world. Um, so yes, it is an issue that, that's another chapter. The one after rethinking economics is rethinking the social contract and rethinking geopolitics that could result from these very, very powerful technologies. Some place in the world will be the first to be a stellar society of, essentially super abundant power, super abundant food, super uh, abundant transportation, easy recycling, super abundant information and communications technologies, and therefore super abundant AI on a per capita basis. And someplace will be the first. And I think we should encourage a race to the top, or what we at Rethink X call a race to the stars, of encouraging this technology as widely as possible for as many people as possible, as opposed to, a few places in the world dominating and hoarding this technology, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think this is one of my fears of this big centralization with that powerful tools that are coming up, and yeah, just a few companies controlling basically.
Yeah, I think, the one of the fundamental issues here is that these are all sort of self-reinforcing feedback loops. So we've seen this with computers and software, and one, you design a computer chip and software that helps you design computer chips. And if you're an electrical engineer, you then use those computers and that software to design the next generation of computer chips, and the next generation of software that helps you optimize computer chips, or help is now writing software for you. You can put in your computer code and tell AI to make it more efficient, do the same output, but make it run faster. Um, so this is a self-reinforcing feedback loop. The cheaper and faster and better our chips get, and the better the software gets, the better we can design the next generation of chips and software, which makes it even easier to build the next generation of chips and software. And this is a self-reinforcing cycle, and any self-reinforcing processes are the basis of any sort of exponential growth in a population. Two individuals become four, which become eight, which becomes 16, and soon the curve explodes right off the top of the graph. We see this in economic growth. This is the basic driving factor behind nuclear explosions, chain reactions, where kicking out nuclear particles causes the other atoms to do the same, which causes other atoms to do the same. Two becomes four, becomes eight, becomes 16. And it causes exponential and runaway growth. It's also exponential and runaway collapse too. Those are also self-reinforcing processes. So these self-reinforcing dynamics are very powerful for driving economic growth, population growth, or nuclear explosions, or any things that can be very destructive. So I think the more we understand this economics of the economics of exponential growth, that you make solar panels that make energy cheaper. Cheaper energy means cheaper transportation, means cheaper and more powerful AI, means humanoid robots that do our work for us. And if those humanoid robots are building solar panels and they're building batteries, and the AI is running, driving the cars, um, and all of these self-reinforcing feedback loops are now interacting with each other too. And each of these little loops is making larger ones possible of transportation, energy, labor, all becoming cheaper, AI and automation and information and communications cheaper and more powerful, faster. This has gone on, for decades now. Um, and these are very powerful technologies that will radically reshape the future in the coming decades. And because it's so fast, it's basically impossible to see decades into the future. Nobody can tell you what life will be like in 2050. We can barely see what life will be like 5 years from now if you just look back at how it was 5 years ago, or 5 or 10 years before that. So it's difficult enough to look 5 or 15 years into the future, but we need to do it. We need to try at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking back into all these patterns and how everything is so interconnected, would you say there is a connected consciousness, some sort of something that would make sense to see that this is all so interconnected? Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Um, Yeah, I don't know if I've really thought a lot about that issue. I'm an engineer, and my book deals with a lot of things like carpenter's nails and that kind of stuff. So I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about maybe the deep moral implications of this, of a collective consciousness. But certainly, look at what technology has done for shared experiences of people having similar experiences and sharing them, even on things like TikTok and whatever. Um, and so it certainly gives us the opportunity, to understand each other and to communicate now. The technology that makes it possible to automatically translate between two languages in real time. We're seeing the first ability now of these online meeting platforms where I could speak in one language and it will translate to another and makes it sound like my voice speaking another language, basically. So so. You look at so we could have easier communication between people, and at least the opportunity to talk with each other. So I would love to have had a option when I published my book. I wrote it in English, and I'd love to have an option of, say, publish in 30 languages, and it would automatically do a great translation. And you could buy it in whatever language you want. But we're almost at that point now with AI, where you can record something, a video in one language, and it does automatic translation, or at least captions or things like that. And that certainly helps for communication. But I think, those sorts of technologies, especially AI related, are at least giving us, and communications are at least giving us the possibility to have these kind of conversations and open up, uh, our ability to read books from people who wrote in other languages 100 years ago, and these books have been forgotten and they're on shelves. We're digitizing them, and now I love going to places like archive.org, the Internet Archive, where they have all these old books that are accessible. You sign up for an account for free. And it's scanned in pages, so it's not quite as easy as a modern sort of digital book or a video or something like that. But I just love seeing all these old books where you read about people who've had similar dreams to what we've had. I mentioned similar science fiction authors and things talking about a world where cars drive themselves and we don't have to fight wars anymore because we can all grow as much food as we want and we have as much energy as we want, so we can live lives the way we want. And the fact that we're realistically the first generation in history who could do that, who could who don't need to ever burn anything to get energy, who could make food without killing animals, that is actual meat, is actual milk, that we can move ourselves around without having to burn anything. We're the first generation to do this is really a privilege, and I think we should harness it the best we can. And I think that's part of why I reject the sort of degrowth mindset, and seek out like-minded people who are interested in a world of abundance and human flourishing and a stellar world for all.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And um, I was about to ask you what you're excited about, but I think this really answers it. Are there any fears that you have? I mean, we already touched a few points, but are there any?
Um, yeah, there's a quote that I have in my book, by a man named Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who wrote a book called Babies by Choice or by Chance. And this was 1960. So, we're talking decades ago. He said, whenever I get discouraged with the current situation, I look back over the last decade or two and cannot help but be thrilled by the vast progress that has been made. Then the future appears very bright. And so, I think at all times there are people who have worried about the future. I'll read that one to you, but I'll also read another one to you, that is in the book, by a man who was concerned with military technology and how rapidly it was developing. And he said, "Time altereth the order of war with many new inventions daily." And that was a man named Robert Barrett writing in 1591. So we're talking, hundreds of years ago. He was concerned with how quickly new technologies were being developed. So quickly, many new inventions daily. I don't know if there were actually many new inventions daily back in the 1590s. But what he's saying is, technology is changing faster than I can handle. And he was talking in the 1590s. And then in the 1960s, Dr. Guttmacher was saying, I get excited whenever I look back at how things were a couple of decades ago. Now, in the 1960s, a couple of decades ago was World War II. So he had a bit different perspective. Things legitimately were radically better in the 1960s. But also things like, antibiotics that were developed, and how much progress was made in medical science in the 1950s and early 60s. Of course, it was very exciting for him. So yeah, I do worry about things. As far as new technology goes, most of it is misuse of things, I would say. So whatever, you can use AI to ruin somebody else's life if you want to. At this point, clone their voice, the image of their face, make them say something horrible, and put it out on the internet. And they could spend a lot more effort debunking that and telling people I never said that. But and we've seen situations like that already of people getting radicalized by things they've seen on the internet, and terrorist attacks that have happened because of things like that. So I worry about things like that. I worry about misinformation. I worry about and sort of disinformation. I worry about technologies just being misused. But I think the biggest thing I worry is unnecessary delay, the fear mongering around a lot of new technologies. If we move the needle just a little bit, if you move up whatever day we get to zero CO2 emissions, or zero use of chickens to get eggs, or whatever day we move up, making our air quality a little bit better, of urban air quality, moving up the needle on getting rid of car accidents. If we can eliminate 1% of car accidents one day sooner, 1 million people die every year around the world in car accidents. So if you could eliminate one day's worth, or just a few days worth, 1% of that, 1% of 1 million is 10,000. You're saving, a village of people by saving 1% of 1 year's deaths from one cause of death. So I think my biggest fear is just underutilizing resources, slowing things down, not getting to as powerful AI, as 100% solar winded batteries, autonomous electric vehicles in the form of robo taxis, using precision fermentation to brew milk or egg proteins or any other food that we want, dye using harsh chemicals to produce dyes for clothing or for food, as opposed to using genetically engineered microorganisms, whatever we have to do to get to a world, the stellar world, delaying that uh, 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 the advent of a stellar society for as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. That's what I worry about. It's delay and missed opportunity, as opposed to, or delayed opportunities, as opposed to, of course we can have another world war or anything like something like that. But underutilizing the tools that we have available is also a risk.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fascinating to see the history where we've always been worrying about the future and always been worrying about all the new change that we can't even see yet. And yeah, there is a part of where you're writing in your book that it seems always that change is increasing, right? That the pace of change
Mhm.
is all the time increasing. Maybe can you share a little bit about that part because I thought it was very fascinating.
Sure. So in researching this book, like I said, I looked through hundreds of examples of of technologies that have replaced another or that have been enabled by convergence of other technologies and were quickly adopted. I looked at more than 1,500 examples, and about 150 made it into the book, where I actually mentioned them by name and the pattern by which they were adopted. But I've collected data on many different examples. So this book that I've written, The Pattern of Progress, is also part of a larger sort of research project that has produced this database of examples that I can then go through and do things like make some of the graphs that are in the book. One of which is I've gathered data on, all different technologies, from the car to making steel to uh, uh, airbags for cars, and the different kinds of tires for cars, and carpenter's nails, like I said, and nuclear weapons, and chemicals that are used for fabric dyes, and different materials, aluminum, right? So in the 1800s, early 1800s. Aluminum is one of the most abundant elements on Earth, on the surface of the Earth, and we didn't know how to get it in pure form as a pure metal until the late 1800s, and it was largely an energy problem. We developed, with electricity, electrolyzers were able to harvest aluminum from ore. So this opens up a whole new material possibility. And with aluminum, the Wright brothers made their engine for their airplane out of aluminum because it was lightweight. So it opens up flight. It opens up, canned beverages, so Coca-Cola cans made from aluminum. Um, Materials, energy, information, all getting cheaper, and therefore more quickly adopted. So what I did was I gathered, for all these different examples I could think of, when did it reach 10% adoption in the marketplace, and when 80%? When was it, just enough, serving just enough people that this thing has a real chance of becoming a dominant technology? Because there are plenty of little technologies that got a couple percent market share and then died out, or were never widely adopted. Um, but when did it reach 10% market share? When did it reach 80% market share? And how much time did it take to go from one to the other? So we started off the conversation talking about Tony Seba and his example of horses in 1900 in New York City, and cars in 1913. Um, and cars go a lot further in a year than a horse will. So if you have one horse and one car, and a car is going around 5 times as much as the horse, then the car is doing most of the traveling. So we know from U.S. government records and other countries around the world how many cars there were by year and how many horses there were by year. So we can figure out and approximate how much traveling was being done in cars and how much traveling was being done by horses. And it really did go from about 10% of all traveling being done in horse-drawn wagons, at least in the US, to 80% in about a 13-year period. It didn't take many decades. It was basically, 1905, 1910, you were traveling by horse. 15 years later, you were traveling by car. So I did that. I have one dot on my graph for traveling by car, and as I said, many other technologies as well. And I plotted by the year that the technology reached 10% adoption, how many years did it take to reach 80%? And obviously, back in the 1800s, I was looking at things like the railroads and telegraphs and telephone and steel and things like that. And those took, in some cases, decades. Even basic things like flush toilets and electricity in homes in the early 1900s. It could have taken decades. Now we have things that are taking just a few years. So large language models, the percentage of people who say that they've ever used ChatGPT, or even things like genetically modified sugar beets, the genetically modified papaya. A lot of genetically modified crops are quickly adopted in the U.S. Um, um, so if we just plot for 150 different technologies in the last 150 years or so, you can see this general downward trend in how it takes less time today than it took 170 years ago to adopt these new fundamental technologies relating to transportation and materials and communications. Um, so it's one of the figures in the book, but the slope is approximately 1 year for every decade. So in the last 170 years, 170 years ago, it took 25 to 30 years. It's now more like 10 to 12 years on average. Some things are faster, some are slower, but we're now seeing regularly things that take less than 10 years to take over the market. Um, it didn't take decades for streaming music to replace CDs. It didn't take decades for CDs to replace cassettes. It didn't take decades for cassettes to replace vinyl records. Each of those only happened over a decade or so. So the more recent technologies take less time, and the older ones a bit more time. And it leads me to the question of, okay, where does this go? Will in 2 or 3 decades, will every technology be adopted almost instantly everywhere? I mean, it's certainly possible if you have, AI, and every car in the world can essentially communicate with each other. When one car experiences something new, some new situation it's never experienced before, that can be used as training data to teach every other robotaxi, Waymo robotaxi or Tesla robotaxi, to, oh, watch out for this situation because one car somewhere saw this new thing that we'd never seen before. So it's certainly possible that new ideas and new technologies could be adopted, even faster than they are now. But my analysis so far has shown across materials, food, energy, transportation, things really are getting adopted faster now than they were certainly before World War One. There seems to be a real break between sort of before and after the World Wars. So in early 1900s and before, things took longer, but maybe we're all living in Mr. Barrett's world of many new inventions daily that are overwhelming us. That we can't even adjust to the new technology before the new thing comes along.
Wow, fascinating. Thanks so much for doing all that research. It is so helpful to kind of contextualize everything a bit because, yeah, I mean, sometimes we just feel it's a lot, but just seeing the research and that the actual data is there, very fascinating. And I loved one quote that you say: a great idea is more than just a singular insight, it's a lens through which to view the world. How did that change your view on the world, the whole writing the book process?
Yeah, I didn't really have an appreciation for a lot of these technologies, a lot of ideas, how quickly things have changed in the past. It was really this, as I said, this video I watched by Tony Seba, sitting at my desk at my old company, where he started off with the images of cars and horses, and he showed how dramatically the world changed in 13 years. Um, and when he points that out, of this is how one technology replaces another, and in that's an hour-long presentation. I don't want to pretend it's just that that those two photos. He talks about
Right.
cell phones. He talks about cars. He talks about solar panels. He talks about batteries. He talks about all sorts of things in that presentation. And as I've said, he's written entire other books as well. It's not just that one presentation. But in his work, he often talks about this, what I have been calling the pattern. This, how one technology replaces another. And once somebody has shown it to you, you start finding examples everywhere. Like I said, I was finding examples. Wasn't even trying to. I was reading about drug problems, and found, oh, these are just different technologies for making chemicals. And you start seeing this pattern everywhere, and you start seeing examples and collecting them, and you really can't stop. So this idea, this idea is more than, just somebody pointing out one idea to you. It now becomes a lens of how to think about history, of and how empire is rising and falling, and different technologies. When we talk about the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, that's why we have different ages. Is because one technology replaced another. So the wheel spreads so quickly that we're not even really 100% certain where it was invented, because it spread so quickly that different languages adopted the same words. We see this today too. Technologies that spread quickly tend to have the same name in every language. So like the word sushi is sushi in every language. The Japanese invented sushi, and it spread in the 1980s and 90s, basically. So if somebody else invented something, you borrow their name for it, and if it spreads quickly, you just use their name. We call it sushi because that's the Japanese word for it. Um, the transistor is the same in every language, basically. Whereas words and concepts that we've invented or discovered or independently are different in different languages. So the word for love is, family or child, is different in every language. The word for water is different in every language, because we've all had to invent our own words for these concepts. Um, but technologies that spread quickly, everybody has used television or automobile or some variation, like electricity or something like that, because those technologies spread quickly. Um, so um, um, so when somebody points out this pattern to you, like I said, it becomes a lens through which to view the world. You go back and you reevaluate everything you thought you knew, of why did certain wars happen? Why did certain empires rise or fall? There were whole empires in parts of the world that built themselves on one technology, basically, and they became a center of silk weaving, or a center of iron production, or a center of car production. Detroit, that became that grew dramatically, and it was the wealthiest city in the U.S. per capita. It was more wealthy than New York in the early 1900s, based off of cars. Um, and now Silicon Valley, be off of the transistor, basically, and the software revolution that it's enabled, and some other places in the world, most likely, maybe Silicon Valley, but other places too, are going to harness AI. We're going to see, energy superpowers, really superpowers. So this idea of superpower, of abundant power most of the year, someplace in the world is going to be the energy superpower of the world, because they use solar power, wind power, and batteries. And it's looking like places like South Australia, which seem to be furthest along in adopting solar panels. And when they reach this ignition point of, we just have an incredible abundance of power, um, then they'll become a recycling center. They'll become a uh, AI data center, something like that, um, and they will unlock these new possibilities. Um, So yeah, I think when somebody points out this pattern to you, you sort of slap your head and it's like, why did nobody ever notice this before? Why this is almost like a law of physics and a law of history, and I can't believe I never noticed it until I collected all these examples, and now I can't stop collecting them. So
That that's so cute. I love that so much. Already heading a little bit towards the end, you were already saying that it's very hard to predict 5 to 10, 15 years. But let's try to
mhm.
maybe try to predict a 5 to 10 years world. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, obviously, the biggest things that are happening in the world right now are the ones that are in the news every day. We're seeing, I think, autonomous electric taxis. So we're seeing this now. Waymo is already operating this. It's growing exponentially. We have ride sharing services like Uber and Lyft, and Waymo is eating up market share in just a few cities where they are operating. People say that without a driver, it'll be cheaper to operate a taxi. People are using Waymos even when they're more expensive. People say they just enjoy the experience of being alone in a vehicle and not having a driver to have to talk to if you don't want to, or worry about being in a vehicle with someone else. So late at night on your own, get home safely. People will pay more for that experience. So this is a disruption from above. We saw it with iPhones replacing simpler phones. We saw it with the Tesla Model S coming in at the top of the car market and then working its way down. And if Waymo and now maybe Tesla it will be starting a robo taxi service. And just cheaper lithium ion batteries are making electric bicycles and other forms of electric transportation, electric ferries, electric ships, electric trucks for moving goods. These things are finally at the point where we're seeing a rapid adoption of them. This is often businesses that are buying these things. So it'll be businesses that are operating taxi services, businesses or municipalities that run ferries, businesses that buy big delivery trucks. So they want to change as quickly as possible because for them it's purely financial. It's how do we reduce the cost of and downtime for our delivery vehicles? We do that by buying electric vehicles that require less maintenance and that have lower operating cost. And if they drive themselves, then we don't have to pay drivers and deal with insurance less insurance issues, and the vehicle can drive itself 20 hours a day instead of 8 or 10. Um, so rapid adoption of electric vehicles, and this is already affecting the oil market. As I said, sales of internal combustion engine cars peaked in 2017, 2018, and it's been heading down since then. So this could be massive transformation for the oil industry, for the car industry, just making far fewer vehicles, which means less steel, it means less glass, it means less leather. 15% of all of the leather in the EU is used for car interiors. But companies that are making electric cars are generally not offering leather interiors. And people who care about the environment want an electric car. They don't want a leather interior in their car. And certainly with taxis, it's more difficult to run a taxi service with leather interior. You want something more durable that can handle any person or animal or whatever package or whatever being thrown into the back seat. Um, so, so they're not. So this could be, a collapse of the leather market or a portion of it. Um, so, so the implications here. Some of these were laid out in Rethink X's Rethinking Transportation 2020 to 2030 that was published in 2017 now, but now we're just seeing these taxi services finally start to take off. Um, and then uh, AI. You asked what things are happening big in the next 5 years. I think electric vehicles, autonomous electric vehicles, taxis are a big one. Energy, solar, wind, and batteries growing exponentially. We're already seeing it impacting coal consumption. It looks like maybe the natural gas market is up next. Um, and we're seeing some place in the world is going to be the first place that's generating 100% of its energy off of solar, wind, and batteries, and it's probably someplace like South Australia or wherever just makes the race and harnesses it. Um, AI growing exponentially. We're just at the beginning of this AI revolution. It's not going to stop with just chat GPT paragraphs of text. It's going to start seriously impacting people's jobs. We're already seeing it when people who are voice actors and things like that, narrators. So my book, The Pattern of Progress, has just gone online with the audiobook version, is just now available. I didn't read it. It's 20 hours long. I wasn't going to sit down and read it. I didn't hire someone to read it. It's an AI generated voice. It sounds a little bit robotic, but it's not bad. It's certainly listenable, and it just made it so much easier to get a product out into the world. To push a button with Amazon, and their automated service takes care of it. So these sorts of things, AI, energy, uh, autonomous cars are essentially a form of AI. Um, all of these things are having impacts now, and they're growing exponentially. They're being accelerated by these self-reinforcing feedback loops, and they're going to be big issues in the next 5 years for employment for a lot of people, I think, who do things that AI can do, which these days is a lot of people. Um, and professional drivers will be impacted, taxi drivers and uh, truck drivers by autonomous vehicles. And that means, medical care, people in emergency rooms, doctors and nurses will be impacted if there are fewer people, getting run over by cars, which is a good thing. It means fewer doctors and nurses having to deal with those injuries. Um, so I think in the next 5 years, energy, transportation, AI are all, uh, you know, they're all developing extremely rapidly right now, and they will for the next coming years, and having real impacts on people's lives.
Some sort of paradigm shift that you would, or some sort of something that you would give to everyone that's listening and is kind of scared of that moment of transition,
Hmm.
have some sort of, I don't know, something they could kind of think of, some sort of paradigm that they could be, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I end my book with a quote from Walt Disney, and he said, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." And I just think it's a wonderful quote, where we have greater power now than we've ever had before. We have powers individually that people 100 years ago couldn't even imagine, of the ability to talk with each other over long distances, of our ability to move huge masses of material just by turning a wheel on a vehicle, basically pushing a pedal, of now transmitting information, sifting through information, creating new things. If you want to be a musician, an author, a writer, whatever you want to do, uh, we have just so much more power than we've ever had before. It's really a matter of harnessing it, and that comes back, as I said before, to the dreamers and the thinkers. And that's one step, is coming up with the idea, and the next step is then taking that idea into action, and that requires the courage to actually do it. Um, when I started writing this book, everybody says it's such a challenge to write a book, and there are a lot of people who start writing a book and never finish it. And I knew there was a chance that I'll get into that situation too. I'll write half of a chapter and it'll stop and never come back to it. And it's just a matter of sitting down and doing it, having the willingness to put in the work, and to tell yourself, I can do this if I just do it a little bit every day. Um, and we're seeing this now of people who have never written computer programs before teaching themselves to be AI programmers, because they say, I have the ability to do this that nobody's ever had before, of a computer that will teach you how to be a computer programmer just by asking it questions. People who have never made a documentary movie before, saying, I'll work with the tools I have. I have a phone. I have when that's it. And I'll start with that. Um, or whatever. Start your own podcast or something. I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out along the way. But you have to have the courage to do it. You have the idea first, and you have the courage to try it. And you might fail, but that's okay. You try it anyway. Um, so I think that's the paradigm shift. It's one of, from, as you mentioned before, from scarcity to abundance. Of Our economics and our history has been one of limited ability, limited time, limited power, limited energy, limited ability to do work, limited ability to move goods or people over distances. And those limits are dropping. They've been dropping through these self-reinforcing processes that have made energy cheaper and transportation cheaper and cleaner, and our ability, computer ability, AI, growing exponentially. It's just a matter of having the courage to actually harness these tools to the best ability that we can and push it forward for the next generation.
Thanks so much for having the idea and the courage to publish and be here. And
Thank
it's
you.
a big, yeah, it's just a big gift for us to have now. And just final question: if you have anything else that you would like to add, maybe a question that you would like to leave the listeners with.
Well, like I said, there were more chapters to the book that I probably should have written, but really couldn't do on my own. Rethinking economics, rethinking geopolitics, rethinking the social contract and the future of labor, and how the sort of operating system of our society will work. So any feedback that people have, comments and questions, any contributions that people could make, somebody has to write this book on rethinking economics, rethinking society, rethinking the climate, um, and maybe me as an engineer, I'm not the right person to do that. But if someone else can read my book, and if you don't want to buy my book, if you just want to read Rethink X's free material, it's at rethinkx.com. We have Rethinking Transportation, Rethinking Energy, Rethinking Climate Change, Rethinking Food and Agriculture. So those materials can get you started.
And
Tony
I
Seba,
the
I'm
book.
sorry, what's that?
I just
But
highly recommend the book.
but yeah, if you want to buy the book, buy the book. If you want to buy 100 copies and give them away to all your friends and family, go right ahead. I'm not going to stop you from buying lots of copies. Um, and if you want to check out on YouTube, Rethink X and Tony Seba and the work that we've done, please do, as a way to get started. But then, please carry it forward from there. Have whatever aspect of your life you think needs rethinking. You can start with the materials that we've provided, and then tell us whatever your passion is and whatever motivates you, and what contribution you have to rethinking that aspect of life.
Beautiful way to end this. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to those 5 to 10 years, that new world in the making.
Yes, yeah, it's going to be. I mean, the past 5 years has been dramatic, and the next 5 will be too. And I don't know the future any better than anybody else, but by studying the past, I've done my best to try to be as prepared as I can for the future.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Great, thank you.